He's immensely seductive. Quite sure he's right. Obsessionally neurotic. Pretty dangerous, in fact.
Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
Do you mean you doubt your powers to convince him?
Say it! Say it!
All right, I'll say it.
Worse than that. What I'm afraid of is his power to convince me.
We're talking about putting a manifestly irresponsible man on national television.
Sweetheart, be reasonable.
What? This is the end game.
All right, everybody. It is Friday, April 4th, 2025, the 75th day of the Golden Age. I'm your moderator, Chris Paul. Let's be reasonable. Let's just get right into it. Right into it. Donald Trump had one of the most interesting Truth Social posts yesterday. In the morning, we all woke up to such an interesting message. Whatever could he mean? Here's what he says. The operation is over. The patient lived and is healing. The prognosis is that the patient will be far stronger, bigger, better, and more resilient than ever before. Make America great again. That's quite a statement. What operation could he be talking about? Now, it sounds like he's talking about some kind of surgery or something. They have a sick patient attacked with a very deadly pandemic, perhaps, by the invisible enemy invading the body politic of America. We have to do something to heal this sick patient. So we're going to do an operation. And if you saw the episode on Wednesday, you can probably guess that I believe the operation was started 5 years ago. The chart that saved Trump's life, the little arrow on the bottom pointing to the beginning of May, the end of March, the beginning of May, or sorry, that's not how months work. The end of March, the beginning of April, back in 2020, Donald Trump had declared the COVID national emergency. He put the Defense Production Act into motion. Some say maybe the Stafford Act as well. But the idea would be that he was nationalizing various American companies in service of the war effort as a wartime president in response to the national emergency. The invisible enemy was inside our country, and we had to battle back that invisible enemy. And apparently the operation ended with Liberation Day. Trump talked again about the operation yesterday on Air Force One, and it was quite an interesting. The entire thing is about 20 minutes long. I'm not going to play the whole thing, obviously, but a lot of stuff in this particular appearance. And we'll just start here from the beginning for a minute or so. He talks again about the patient after displaying the Trump gold card.
How are you, Mr. President?
I haven't seen you in a while. $5 million. For $5 million, this could be yours. That was the first of the cards. You know what that card is? It's the gold card. The Trump card, gold card.
Who's the first buyer?
Me. I'm
the
first.
second?
I don't know, but I'm the first buyer. It'll be out in about less than 2 weeks, probably. Pretty.
Now, I have no idea, by the way, why Trump would buy a gold card. That's supposed to give you essentially citizenship. It's like better than a green card. and you can purchase it for $5 million. So I doubt Trump would need to do that. But hey.
Exciting, right?
Ready for some questions?
Anybody want to buy one? Okay, let's go.
First, we'd love to get your reaction, sir, to what's going on in the financial markets today.
Well, I mean, it's to be expected. This is a patient that was very sick. We really inherited a terrible economy, as you know, with a lot of problems, including loss of manufacturing and plants closed up all over the country. You know, we've lost 90,000 plants since NAFTA, if you think of that. 90,000. It's not even believable. And about 6 million jobs. And so it was a sick patient. It went through an operation on Liberation Day. And it's going to be a booming country, a very booming country. It's going to be amazing, actually. And we see it because we have trillions of dollars committed to come in. Trillions.
Sir, can I ask you, when you...
So a sick patient and an operation. And he said we inherited a really terrible economy. And then he stretched that immediately all the way back to NAFTA. And I would imagine that if pressed, he would take it back even further through opening our economy to China through the 1980s. We played some of that footage from Donald Trump's interviews back in the 80s, one with Oprah Winfrey, one with Larry King. And he's been talking about these issues now for 40 years. And what we're talking about is the end of the top-down, centralized control by the global regime over the entire global economy and world trade. Steve Bannon, no one covers this stuff better than Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon, I believe, is at the head of the information stream. He's that great body of water feeding into the information stream, planning out exactly how this narrative operation is going to be executed. I don't know that to be true. It just seems like he is kind of always directing things from a bit ahead of everyone else. And honestly, I don't know where we would be without that guy, to be perfectly frank. I think that Steve Bannon is a national hero and a national treasure. And he's my surrogate dad, as I've said before. He's not really my dad, obviously. But I love him, and nobody handles and analyzes these things better. And what an interesting bit of video yesterday on War Room. This is a few minutes long. I think it's worth playing. And tell me if you've heard these things discussed in this way before, maybe also on this here podcast.
A system that has been in place since the end of World War II, the post-war international rules-based order, set up with American institutions and paid for by American blood. The victory in World War II and us being the arsenal of democracy. The huge casualties, as we talk about, and I believe that this is really... We're going to bring, because Russia was exempted, and we're doing this rapprochement with Russia. We've gone to war with the CCP, really to free Lao Beijing. I think what you're seeing, folks, and what's going to play out the next couple of years, we're actually ending World War II. In World War II, although we had the unconditional surrender of the governments and the military of the fascists in Italy and the imperial Japanese in Tokyo, and of course the Nazis in Berlin, it had kind of immediately got off track. And that's where we had the Cold War immediately with our...
He said we're kind of ending World War II at this point. It's just been ongoing for 70 additional years. 75 additional years? Where are we now? 76? Something like that? It's a lot.
Who'd been our biggest ally during the war, the Bolsheviks, under Stalin. And that Cold War went all the way to 1989 at Tiananmen Square and the fall of the Berlin Wall. And then when the people in those two countries had had enough of it, and President Reagan, obviously the victory, pushing the evil empire, when they collapsed and cratered, we kicked into the elites in America had already set up a globalist system. This is why in 74, we talked about Spencer Morrison yesterday, the first time we had a trade deficit, going off the gold standard, the Arab oil embargo. All of it happened in the early 70s, that whole decade. The globalists took over. And so instead of taking out the Chinese Communist Party, we emboldened them to the detriment of Lao Beijing. This was the Bush. This was Scowcroft. This is the neoliberal neocons in the Bush, who are no different than the Democrats, really. Then when the Berlin Wall fell, really the West, led by Western Europe, tried to just go and steal everything of the Russian people. He used to come to our offices in Beverly Hills. Oh, you can buy the greatest studio in the world for 5 cents on the dollar. I said, no meeting. You're out of here. And they go, why? I go, because one day the Russian people are going to sit there and go, hey, who are these foreigners that stole our assets? And that's what happened. A couple of years later, the KGB took over. The KGB runs it today. And the Chinese Communist Party is stronger than ever. What President Trump is really doing is saying that post-war international rules-based order eventually got to gut. It set up a globalist system that was predicated upon the working men and women in the United States, for them to supply the cannon fodder of their sons and daughters to be spread out all over hell's half acre in these forever wars, but also to pay the price economically and to make sure all the high-value added jobs that had been here during our rise to power would be shipped overseas to work essentially as slave labor throughout the rest of the world, while you suffered here and had to work a couple of jobs or got a job in McDonald's, or I don't know, was it 18 million men are out of the workforce because of no high-value manufacturing jobs. That's what he's trying to bring back. That's the whole package. That's what this is about. Jack Posobiec last night told me it should be called The Great Deal. The Great Deal. He's made a compact with the American people that I will put America first and I will put American citizens first. He said something very powerful yesterday. Whether Republicans or Democrats, these individuals thought they were president of the world. You're not president of the world. You're president of the United States of America. And you're the leader of the American people. So with all the complexity and everything they're trying to throw at you, and the Steve Leismans of the world and all this BS they're trying to throw out, this is quite simple. We're not going to get ripped off by a bunch of elites in these countries that we underwrite, that we are upside down on commerce, upside down on trade, because they hinder our trade with non-trade barriers and tariffs, at the same time that you're paying and underwriting their defense.
I don't know how much clearer it can be than that. This is the global regime system as it's been implemented since World War II. The full control over global trade and global economies. The system was as pervasive throughout the world as they could possibly make it just a couple of decades ago, and now it is being chipped away. And it seems with Trump's declaration on Wednesday, we have reached the final stage of that process for the United States of America. And at that point, being the critical factor in the defense of the global regime, the funding of the global regime, and providing the labor for the global regime while our tax money subsidizes these other countries rather than taking in tariffs from them. The critical player in that global infrastructure has now backed out of the system. And so that, I believe, is what we are seeing now. And I'm happy about it. Good twin, evil twin dynamic worldwide. The urge toward centralization and top-down centralized control over everything, opposed to the urge toward decentralization and fragmentation and sovereign nationalism worldwide. That's the game, as far as I'm concerned. I've been making that case now for 4+ years, and I think that we are seeing kind of the beginning of the final stages, at least. Maybe it's more advanced than that. Every time I think that we have a proper reading on the pace of things, I always remember informational timelines. Whatever is happening now, the people in the know, the people making these decisions, the people in control are so far ahead of where we are able to understand that recognizing that, I think we have to assume things are much further along. We've been hearing about the emergence of the multipolar world order from all corners of the earth over the last 4 years, but before that as well, particularly since though. And now that is in full view, I think, of a great part of the world. So we're going to talk about that in big part today, and then we'll get into some domestic stuff in a little bit. Trump also had this to say yesterday outside the White House.
Like when a patient gets operated on, and it's a big thing. I said this would exactly be the way it is. We have $6 or $7 trillion coming into our country.
I am guessing that is probably pretty hard to hear for people. Hold for processing. I know Donald Trump posted a video. I think it's a shorter clip of those same comments, but hopefully it's at a better volume. Here we are. Let's just go ahead and try this instead. Apologies for the volume on that one.
I think it's going very well. It was an operation, like when a patient gets operated on, and it's a big thing. I said this would exactly be the way it is. We have $6 or $7 trillion coming into our country, and we've never seen anything like it. The markets are going to boom, the stock is going to boom, the country is going to boom, and the rest of the world wants to see, is there any way they can make a deal? They've taken advantage of us for many, many years. For many years, we've been at the wrong side of the ball, and I'll tell you what, I think it's going to be unbelievable. The thing that people have to talk about, we're up almost to $7 trillion of investment coming into our country, and you'll see how it's going to turn out. Our country's going to boom.
Our country is going to boom. $7 trillion, he's saying now. I don't know if you wanted to go fact check that with what's been announced, that you would be able to add it all the way up to $7 trillion. So people would then say, Trump is lying. Trump's overestimating how much investment is coming in. Donald Trump is always way ahead of where the media is. Of course, he's way ahead of where we are as well, but he's way ahead of where the media is. We don't need to fact check Donald Trump by checking on the news or what's been officially announced. He knows what he's doing. How many times does he need to prove this to us? By the way, John and I had a brief discussion about this on Devolution Power Hour on Saturday. And he picked up on something as I was saying this that made him, he just pushed back a little bit and made me clarify, which was good. He said, you often talk about how Donald Trump knows all these things and all of these people out there critiquing him obviously have just a tiny fraction of the information Donald Trump has access to and the knowledge about where things are going, what the plans are. So I was making the point that them critiquing him as though they are more informed about these situations than he is makes no sense. And he said, well, how does that reconcile with your stance on these various members of the fantasy team or whatever, the critiques of some of these characters in relation to Donald Trump? Why don't you then trust his decisions in that he has more information than you do? And I said, well, I do trust his decisions. When I am making these critiques about members of the fantasy team, my main point is we don't know exactly what Donald Trump is doing with this selection. So we have to let it play out and then see. And we have to be mindful of the fact that maybe he's not putting these people in their positions because they're the best selection that anyone could ever make to do the job as well as possible. Maybe there are other reasons why he's making these choices. And my critique is never Donald Trump shouldn't have made these choices. It's only that the American people still have the responsibility to watch what these people do and not assume that just because Donald Trump has given them a position that he is saying to us, this is the best person, guard this person, please, with your lives. Okay? So I hope that makes sense. because those are definitely different things. At no time do I ever think I know more about the situation than Donald Trump does. Okay? That has never been the case. I do trust Donald Trump that he is doing the right things, that he is doing the things the plan calls for, and that his actions have intention. I just don't assume to know those intentions and thereby know that the person he has chosen to fulfill a particular role is a good person, the best person, or a person chosen for that reason. And I think that that's probably pretty clear to my audience at this point. Okay, let's continue. Donald Trump, in an interview with Larry Kudlow, and I'm not sure when this is from, but it was posted on X, formerly Twitter, just yesterday. I thought it was very interesting. Donald Trump talking about the purpose of tariffs.
A tariff is a beautiful thing, but it's got a bad image. It needs you to fix the image. A tariff, we stop wars with tariffs. No. I mean, I had cases where I told a country that were being very aggressive with another country, had nothing to do with us. I just don't like seeing dead people, okay? And they were going to go to war. And I said, if you go to war, and they do a lot of business with the United States, I'm putting 100% tariff on everything you do, any business you do with us. No, this has nothing to do. I said, it does have. I stopped a war. Will I get Nobel Prizes? Never. I mean, look what we did with the Abraham Accords, how good that was. But you can stop wars with tariffs. A tariff is a beautiful thing.
You can stop wars with tariffs. And we've talked about this before. This is leverage for sure when it comes to geopolitics and foreign affairs. And it also eases the trade imbalance, brings jobs back to America, production back to America, prosperity back to America. Now, there are different theories about that. And by the way, while that clip was playing, I looked that up. I believe that is from early October of 2024. So if I'm not mistaken, I think that that's probably accurate. You can stop wars with tariffs. Donald Trump talked about the $7 trillion. He had this to say on Truth Social this morning about investment coming back into America. To the many investors coming into the United States and investing massive amounts of money, my policies will never change. This is a great time to get rich, richer than ever before. So my policies will never change. And if I am right, and I believe I am, and I believe that Steve Bannon's comments attest to that, about the purpose of all this, that this is the end of that top-down centralized system of control over the global economy. This is now the fragmentation, okay? Sovereign nationalism worldwide. Countries make deals one-to-one with other countries. We'll see some of those machinations later on. But those policies will never change. The invisible enemy worldwide, the evil twin faction, as it exists in every country, implementing that top-down system of control, that's the enemy. There's never going to be a time where Donald Trump shifts back toward that arrangement, that level of control over the global economy. His policies are not going to change. Get used to this because this is the new way. This is the new order of things. That new order has now been implemented. And this is just the natural order of things. This isn't the new world order. This isn't a top-down system of control. It's just the natural order of things. Marco Rubio talked about the adjustment in the global arrangement today, or yesterday, I should say. This is in front of NATO. I believe it was yesterday.
Largest consumer market in the world, and yet the only thing we export is services. And we need to stop that. We need to get back to a time where we're a country that can make things, and to do that we have to reset the global order of trade.
And the other part of my question.
Well, the worst thing is to leave it the way it is forever. I mean, this just can't continue. We can't continue to be a country that doesn't make things. We have to be able to make things to provide jobs for Americans. That's it. It's that simple. China is an example. I mean, it's outrageous. I mean, they don't consume anything. All they do is export and flood and distort markets, in addition to all the tariffs and barriers they put in place. So the president rightly has concluded that the current status of global trade is bad for America and good for a bunch of other people, and he's going to reset it, and he's absolutely right to do it.
So twice there, at the beginning and at the end, Marco Rubio said that Donald Trump was resetting the world order of trade. And Bannon actually, toward the end of that clip, maybe I'll just pull it back up and head toward the end. He talks about the Great Reset and flips it back on its head, as we've talked about a number of times. Hijacking the Great Reset. That was an episode that I did, I don't know, a month ago.
Trump and cursing Trump's reactionary followers. Of course they're going to do that. I wouldn't expect them to do anything else. But they've been outed. We're not paying for your defense anymore. And we're not going to let you steal from us of what you've been doing. And you can have all kind of complicated, basically that's what it is. And Trump yesterday walked out in that magnificent backdrop of the Oval Office, but festooned with the American flag. Just amazingly beautiful. Great stagecraft there, guys. In the Oval Office, in an overcast and I think slightly chilly day. Liberation Day. One of the most important days in American history. It'll be the national holiday reminding and remembering people about President Trump long after he's gone, decades from now. It won't be his birthday. It'll be April 2nd. When he stepped on the world stage and told the globalists, your game is up. It's over. I hereby decree that we're going to have a different deal. A great deal. A great deal for the American people. And guess what? It'll work out.
Man, either I skipped over it or I didn't catch that part. But he said, Great Reset, you wanted to build back better? We're going to build back better this way. Kind of taking their plan, turning it around, right back on them. This is, so let's go through some of the freak out in response. This is the Washington Post Fareed Zakaria in the evening yesterday. Trump's trade war on reality. So it's a war on reality, you see. It's all just crazy. And we're just going to cut to the end here, these last couple of paragraphs. That's all you need to get the point of this. The rest of it is just Fareed Zakaria's examples from history and how things have been before, meaning they've been this way before. We've conditioned you to believe that all of these things are true. We would never lie to you about history. Sure, the news is fake now, but the history's real. Well, no, the history is just the fake news from before. If we stretch 50 years or 100 years into the future, and they are looking at history of this period right now, they're going to be looking at the mainstream media sources, the papers of record, etc., and the fake news of this moment will be the future's history. So it doesn't matter how many examples from history these people find, or whatever their academics, their economists, etc., dredge up from history to justify something that has no justification and makes no rational sense whatsoever. Doesn't matter how much of that they find. It violates every possible principle of reality. And the inversion here is obvious when he intimates that Donald Trump is the one trapped in the false reality. And remember, democracy, it dies in darkness. Zakaria says Trump's nostalgic worldview is rooted even further back than the 1960s. He looks fondly on the late 19th century, when, as he described this week, the United States had only tariffs and no income tax, and America was stronger economically than it has ever been compared with the rest of the world. This history is nonsense. In 1900, the United States accounted for about 16% of the global economy by one measure. It is now about 26% of it. American standards of living and health are much higher today. Really? Really? I feel like we're constantly poisoned all the time. And maybe medicine has advanced. Also, their means of poisoning us have advanced. I'm sure they were poisoning us back then, too, by the way. I don't know that the percent of global economy is the key measure of our wealth and economic strength. But in acting out on his nostalgic fantasy, Trump might well end up dragging America back to what it was then, a poorer country dominated by oligarchs and corruption, content to swagger around its backyard and bully its neighbors, but marginal to the great currents of global economics and politics. Now, that is just preposterous, okay? First off, poorer country, we are $37 trillion in debt, supposedly. Now, our debt is to global regime bankers who we are at war with. And so when you win a war, you're not in debt to the losers of that war. It's also a regime fiat currency created out of nothing. So $37 trillion, I'm not terribly worried about that. But to suggest that we are a much wealthier country now while being $37 trillion in debt, a number so astronomical that it can't be paid off, and by some measures, as Bannon often talks about, considering the full financial picture, you could call us $100 trillion in debt. We are, back then, Zakaria says, we were dominated by oligarchs and corruption. What are we dominated by now? Oligarchs and corruption. Those are the biggest problems in the country. Those are the problems that the Trump movement has put Trump in place to fight against directly. We were content to swagger around our backyard and bully our neighbors. The American military, on behalf of the global regime, no offense to the military, they don't make the plans, has been sent around the world to bully any country that opposes the global regime. So it's not just our backyard, it's everywhere. Africa, the Middle East, Asia, Europe, South America. Where don't we go to bully anyone who resists the global regime? It is incredible that you could even make this case, but he doesn't. And of course, they will continue to do it because they will go with whatever they've got at this point. And to reiterate a point I made last week and touched on briefly this morning on Badlands Daily, they're going to continue to try to cause as much instability as possible so that the feeling of the pervasive chaos throughout society creates a sense of anxiety in the people, which means that any change will be resisted and or rejected because change causes some level of anxiety and it makes things feel more chaotic. And when people have reached their limit on those feelings, they will then reject the change and reject whoever they believe is causing that change. And that's what we saw in 2020 through the very deadly pandemic, the summer of love, the stolen election, etc. All chaos, all anxiety, people saying this is what it's like in Trump's America. That's why we can't do this anymore. Doesn't matter that Joe Biden didn't receive 81 million real lawful American votes and no one could possibly believe that he did. All that mattered was that we were going to move on from Trump's America. Well, commies, how did that work out for you? Not so well. It made no sense at the time. Makes no sense now. But the chaos and the anxiety are the point. Because if they can destabilize the American consciousness, then they might have a chance of getting everybody back onto the same page and rejecting the Trump agenda. And I believe that that is their goal. Ursula von der Leyen of the European Commission responded to the Trump tariffs yesterday. I am going to play her speech. It is a 6-minute speech, but she speaks slowly, and so I'm going to speed that up. It'll take about 4 minutes. I think it's worth hearing. This is the global response to the Trump tariffs as communicated by a woman that Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of Russia, refers to as Führer. Ursula von der Leyen.
President Trump's announcement of universal tariffs on the whole world, including the European Union, is a major blow to the world economy. I deeply regret this choice. Let's be clear-eyed about the immense consequences. The global economy will massively suffer. Uncertainty will spiral and trigger the rise of further protectionism. The consequences will be dire for millions of people around the globe, also for the most vulnerable countries, which are now subject to some of the highest US tariffs, the opposite of what we wanted to achieve. The tariffs will also hurt consumers around the world. It will be felt immediately. Millions of citizens will face higher grocery bills, medication will cost more, as well as transportation. Inflation will go up, and this is hurting in particular the most vulnerable citizens. All businesses, big and small, will suffer from day one, from great uncertainty to the disruption of supply chains, to burdensome bureaucracy. The costs of doing business with the United States will drastically increase. And what is more, there seems to be no order in the disorder, no clear path to the complexity and chaos that is being created as all US trading partners are hit. In the past 80 years, trade between the European Union and the United States has created millions of jobs. Consumers across the Atlantic have benefited from reduced prices. Businesses have benefited from huge opportunities, leading to unprecedented growth and prosperity. And at the same time, we know that the global trading system has serious deficiencies. I agree with President Trump that others are taking unfair advantage of the current rules, and I'm ready to support any efforts to make the global trading system fit for the realities of the global economy. But I also want to be clear. Reaching for tariffs as your first and last tool will not fix it. This is why from the outset, we have always been ready to negotiate with the United States to remove the remaining barriers to transatlantic trade. At the same time, we are prepared to respond. We are already finalizing the first package of countermeasures in response to tariffs on steel, and we're now preparing for further countermeasures to protect our interests and our businesses if negotiations fail. We will also be watching closely what indirect effects these tariffs could have, because we cannot absorb global overcapacity, nor will we accept dumping on our markets. As Europeans, we will always promote and defend our interests and our values, and we will always stand up for Europe. But there is an alternative path. It is not too late to address concerns through negotiations. This is why our Trade Commissioner, Maroš Šefčovič, is permanently engaged with his US counterparts. We will work towards reducing barriers, not raising them.
Sorry, there's this freeze and then it comes back.
I know that many of you feel let down by our oldest ally. Yes, we must brace for the impact that this will inevitably have. Europe has everything it needs to make it through the storm. We are in this together. If you take on one of us, you take on all of us. So we will stand together and stand up for each other. Our unity is our strength. Europe has the largest single market in the world, 450 million consumers. That is our safe harbor in tumultuous times. And Europe will stand at the side of those directly impacted. We have already announced new measures to support the steel and cars sectors. Last week, we limited the amount of steel that can be imported to Europe tariff-free. This will give more breathing space to these strategic industries. Now, we will also convene strategic dialogues with the steel, the automotive, and the pharmaceutical sectors, and others will follow. Europe stands together for our business, for our citizens, and for all Europeans, and we will continue to build bridges with all those that, like us, care about fair and rules-based trade as a basis for shared prosperity. Thank you. L'annonce du président.
She goes in and gives the same speech again in French and then again in German. What an interesting response that was. And by the way, for part of it, she sounds like she's a Q follower, dropping little Q phrases in there. We'll get to that in just a second. But her primary point there was that whatever happens, it's important to stick with this rules-based global trading system. Tariffs break that up, as we've been talking about for months now, as the point of the tariffs. We always hear it's all these other points. It's leverage. It's for prosperity. It's to bring back manufacturing. It's all these things. No. First and foremost, it is to break the global regime's system of top-down centralized control. And Ursula von der Leyen is admitting to it right there. She said the global trading system has deficiencies. And those deficiencies she listed as countries breaking the rules. And so she said the solution is not to get rid of that system and to move on from that system. It's just to get new rules in place. Like, okay, guys, fine. We'll change the rules. We'll fix the rules. Just don't take away our system. But it is the system that's going away. And the tariffs are going to be in place, and the deals will be made in a bilateral manner. And that's how things should be. That is the Trump agenda. That's the America First agenda. That's the Trump foreign policy. We don't make multilateral agreements with the entire world at once, because then that requires the centralized system of control. You make agreements one-to-one. Maybe we'll see some multilateral agreements, but I hope not. I hope we see one-to-one agreements. Make this agreement with this country, different agreement with a different country, because we have things they need, they have things we need. And it turns out that since we make so many things and our country has the ability to be self-sufficient, then we can provide a lot of things for the rest of the world, and that enriches America. She also did say, though, that she believes Europe has, the European Commission, the European Union has whatever it needs to weather the storm. What storm? Ms. European Commissioner? She also said, if you mess with one of us, then you mess with all of us. Where she goes one, she goes all. Good job, Ursula. Crushing it. I saw we had a Rumble rant there in the chat. Blue Demon 75, $10. Chris, you sound highly unvaccinated. Enjoy your weekend. Well, thank you very much. I am happy to sound this way. It is the only way I know how to sound. Let us continue. Rand Paul, the staunch libertarian who always does the right thing all the time, just like his dad. Rand is not liking the tariffs. Now, I was about to say I have no problem with Rand Paul, but I do have a problem with Rand Paul. Rand Paul used the Constitution as an excuse when he failed to object to the certification of electors after the 2020 election. Now, if he's part of some white hat psyop, blah, blah, then fine, okay? These things can be forgiven, but until we know that that's the case, then it can't be forgiven. So he dislikes the Trump tariffs, and he's making, oh, cool. As I often do, I pulled up the non-archived version of that. And let me see if I can get the proper version. Here we are. This is an op-ed for Fox News. Terminate the Trump tariffs before it's too late. The truth is that tariffs are taxes. They don't punish foreign governments. They punish American families. Well, Rand, I'm going to say that's bullshit, and we're going to be just fine. It doesn't even make sense, okay? It certainly makes sense if Americans are committed to very particular products from foreign countries, and they're used to getting those products for very, very cheap. But if there are American alternatives, or those foreign companies begin manufacturing in the United States, well, then there's no tariffs and there's no taxes on those goods. So if you replace buying the American people replace the habit of buying foreign products with buying American products, which is good for America, well, then the problem just vanishes. So it is a consumption tax, perhaps, but it's one that people have a way to opt out of. Rand Paul, as did Fareed Zakaria, argued that history shows this plan just will not work. he concludes Republicans would be wise to rediscover their principles and oppose new and high taxes. My fellow Republicans can do that by supporting my bill, the No Taxation Without Representation Act, which would require Congress to approve any presidential proposal to impose tariffs before they are put into effect. The truth is that tariffs are taxes. They don't punish foreign governments, they punish American families. When we tax imports, we raise the price of everything from groceries to smartphones, washing machines, and every other conceivable product. It's time we saved the American people from high prices and prevent the Democrat restoration to power. It's time to terminate the tariffs. Now, is he saying that the Democrats are going to take back power based on Trump's tariffs? That's preposterous. Of course, they're not going to. And to the extent that they hold any power now, or that any part of the Uniparty holds power now, it is a direct result of our fake elections. And Rand Paul has no grounds to stand on when it comes to that issue because he accepts our fake elections. Could be because he benefits from our fake elections. Why is Rand Paul supporting the global regime's top-down centralized control over global trade as a libertarian? Oh, it's because everybody can do whatever they want. Isn't that amazing? There's the global regime version of libertarianism. It's like we have all these various options on how we can argue ourselves into the global regime system. Libertarians are also great at arguing for the global regime's moral degradation of societies because everybody can do whatever they want. I mean, take it or leave it. Some people like those points of view. Some people think that government should have no role in creating a culture. Maybe they're right. I'm not trying to argue that case. I'm not saying libertarianism has no points at all. I'm not saying that in the least. But their view of what global free trade means is, again, a total inversion of what it actually means. A top-down, centralized control over the global economy based on all these countries can trade with all these other countries, while the top-down centralized control system is setting tariff rates and subsidizing nations that can't produce for themselves and can't be self-sufficient. That's not free trade. That is fully controlled trade. So, don't know where Rand's actual principles are coming into play here, but they don't make a whole lot of sense as far as I'm concerned. And it's not just about tariffs. We can have all the tariff and economic related conversations. At the end of the day, it's, do we accept the top-down centralized control over the world economy or not? That's the only question. And the answer is, no, we don't. The way to break that system is through these tariffs. That's the end of the argument. We don't need to talk about economics and history and all this other bullshit premised on ideas that have no bearing on reality. Okay? They imagine the system that produces the effects that they then cherry pick from statistics and tell us, oh, this is the right thing to do. It is the same system, in essence, that brought us the COVID response. These people are insane, right? You have to trust the experts. You have to trust the data. And all of these things are wholly corrupted. So to trust any of them, rather than operating on basic principles, all the pragmatic and practical justifications you can ever find, do not refute the basic principles that are unassailable. This is why getting down to first principles all the time is so important. All right, Andrew Yang. It's always good to be in league with Andrew Yang. Andrew Yang, the failed presidential candidate who then thought about building a third party for the 2024 cycle, the fake election cycle. This was the guy who was out there on all the podcasts, Intellectual Dark Web, Sam Harris, Dave Rubin, all these clowns, talking about how AI and the age of automation was going to put everybody out of work, most particularly long-haul truck drivers. And therefore, because of this effect that was incoming, we were going to need a universal basic income. And of course, that is a key component of the global Great Reset agenda. All those useless eaters, well, we're just going to have to put them in their little boxes, plug them into the metaverse, have them watch streaming content all day long, talk to their friends online, form relationships with the OnlyFans girls. That's their reality. And so you'll just give them an allowance in terms of whatever electronic credits they might need to have their little food deliveries come in through Uber Eats or what have you, and they drift off into the techno dystopia. All of that would then be accomplished through a central bank digital currency. And because you can't have a job and you've kind of been brainwashed and conditioned and coaxed out of wanting to work in the first place because you basically have no more will to survive, you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. Well, then the savior is introduced, the savior being the central bank digital currency. And you say, yes, please give me that. I will accept all of these free credits that will pay for all of the things I need. And I will gladly drift off into that tech dystopia. And all of that can be provided under the guise of universal basic income. It's not something that they're going to use as a control system that they can turn off and restrict in whatever ways they choose. It's just going to help you because you can't help yourself. Well, here are Andrew Yang's responses to the tariffs. I effing hate these effing tariffs because they're so effing stupid. And he wrote the words out, very presidential. Yang wrote, on his 73rd day, the Mad King started a trade war yelling tariffs at no one in particular, and the people suffered, kicking off a deep and dark depression. Oh, how poetic. Communicate the fable, relay it to me. I've never seen so much value destroyed deliberately. This is the worst leadership ever. Okay. Such a mature reaction we are getting on all fronts. We were told in the lead up to the Liberation Day announcement, there was going to be market trouble. We discussed on Wednesday that the announcement was initially scheduled for 3 p.m. Eastern and pushed back to 4 p.m. Eastern when the markets close. And maybe that was to nullify a planned market reaction that afternoon while Trump was speaking. And people say, well, how could that happen? That's just a market response. All of this is natural. Well, it's not natural. It's controlled by the same global system. And if you don't believe they are controlling it directly, even though they are, you should at least understand that if they have information dominance and can seed narratives throughout a society and convince enough people to move markets, which they absolutely can, then of course they're going to do that. So we had yesterday the story instead of on Wednesday. This is the Associated Press. Sweeping Trump tariffs shock global economy, drawing threats and calls for talks. United States President Donald Trump's sweeping new tariffs on American imports shocked governments and investors around the world, swiftly spurring both threats of retaliation and calls for negotiation as industries scrambled and global stocks tumbled. Now, was anyone actually shocked by any of this? That would be awfully hard to believe. These things have been planned for a long time. Trump is still in the midst of executing his first-term agenda. He announced all of the things that are happening right now 4 and 5 years ago. I should say, 5 years ago and longer. Of course, the fake and illegitimate president, Joe Biden, was implementing the policies that would push all of this along outside of his own control, of course, because he had no control whatsoever. But none of this is new. The AP says China accused the U.S. of bullying, and the European Union promised robust countermeasures, with French officials suggesting taxes to hit U.S. tech giants. And the tech giants We're very upset. We're going to skip down to the end of this article here, and then we'll jump around a bit. Europe's strategy so far has been to limit retaliation to a few politically sensitive goods, like whiskey and Harley-Davidson motorcycles, in an attempt to push the U.S. to the negotiating table. Economists say that Europe could broaden the trade war to the vast services sector by targeting big tech, a category more vulnerable to retaliation because the U.S. exports more than it imports. The EU response could include attacks on U.S. digital giants such as Google, Apple, Meta, Amazon, and Microsoft, as French officials have recommended. Outgoing German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said the EU must show that we have strong muscles. But he expressed no appetite for sparking an all-out trade war that could hobble the bloc's export-dependent economy. An agreement, he said, is best for prosperity in the U.S., for prosperity in Europe, and for prosperity in the world. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said his government would react with cool and calm heads, telling business leaders in London that he hoped to strike a deal with the U.S. that would see the tariffs rescinded. Nobody wins in a trade war. That is not in our national interest, says Keir Starmer. And hey, Keir, we don't actually care if it's in your national interest. We care if it's in our national interest. And you are free to act and should act in a way that sees to your national interest. But that doesn't affect what the United States does in our national interest. The real question is, are you working in the national interest of your people or of the global regime? And hey, the City of London, the separate city-state in London, maybe he's referring to them. Their national interest is just the British Crown, the global bankers in the City of London. And so they are all operating on the behalf of those people. Karamaga in the chat, $30. APL, when you can. Well, I can. I can. I always can. It is never a bad time to talk about Una Panuna Banca, also known as Anna Paulina Luna. But we don't really have any new Anna Paulina Luna news today. So we're going to stick with the famed stock market collapse of yesterday. This is CNBC. Magnificent Seven relinquishes more than $1 trillion as tech drives stock market nosedive. The Magnificent Seven stocks collectively lost more than $1 trillion in Thursday trading, a stunning milestone that underscores how President Donald Trump's tariff rollout crippled financial markets. Taken together, the 7 mega cap technology stocks that comprise the closely followed index lost around $1.03 trillion in market cap, according to a CNBC analysis of Thursday's session. As a whole, CNBC's Magnificent Seven index tumbled more than 6% in the trading day. Tech stocks led a broad and severe market sell-off as the unveiling of Trump's long-awaited tariff policy created a risk-off atmosphere. The tech-heavy NASDAQ composite tumbled about 6%, recording its worst session since 2020. Trump's plan includes levies of 46% on Vietnam and 32% on Taiwan, two of several countries now facing special duties on exports to the U.S. And Taiwan isn't really a country, it's just China. I mean, we can understand that's obviously going to be the future. And we can just live in that future. So here they show the Magnificent Seven market caps, the companies NVIDIA, Apple, Alphabet, that's Google, Microsoft, Meta Platforms, that's Facebook, Instagram, etc., WhatsApp, Amazon, and Tesla. So those 7 stocks are primarily responsible for the market collapse. Should we care? Perhaps not. White House officials have largely brushed off concerns that Trump's economic policies were roiling the stock market. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent said Wednesday that large market declines seen recently should be attributed instead to poor performance from technology companies, following the launch of an AI model by Chinese startup DeepSeek in January that took Wall Street and Silicon Valley by storm. I'm trying to be Secretary of Treasury, not a market commentator, Bessent said on Bloomberg TV Wednesday night. What I would point out is that especially the NASDAQ peaked on DeepSeek Day. So that's a Mag 7 problem, not a MAGA problem. So he's suggesting that the stock market drop yesterday was due to other factors or primarily related to other factors. And the DeepSeek thing, as we went through at the time, is very interesting. The AI was supposed to be where all this money was flowing. This is where all the important tech industry advances were going to come. The building of data centers with power plants right next to them, all for AI, we are told. Definitely not for Bitcoin, just for AI. And sure, Bitcoin mining with power plants right next to it is the same arrangement, but they're just talking about AI. And China's DeepSeek has made AI essentially the open source model that OpenAI was supposed to be, thus nullifying the importance, in some sense, of those AI advances, but not the Bitcoin advances. Isn't that interesting? It's like they set up the whole infrastructure for Bitcoin under the guise of it being AI and green technology. How did that happen? It's crazy. Donald Trump was talking yesterday in that same event on Air Force One about manufacturing and tech manufacturing coming back to the United States. And what did he talk about? Manufacturing centers with power plants right next to them. It's crazy, huh? It's crazy how a plan comes together. And some might say, my friend G Money would say, that the operation is less about extricating the United States from the global system of trade and more about implementing Bitcoin to battle the global regime bankers. I would suggest that the plan is bigger than just Bitcoin, though that is a very, very important element of it. He and I have that argument regularly. And that's fine. Okay, let's continue. This is a man named Peter Tuchman, who refers to himself as the Einstein of Wall Street. His formerly Twitter profile says he is the most iconic stockbroker at the New York Stock Exchange and the most photographed man on Wall Street. So he sounds like a raging narcissist. I'm not particularly familiar with this man, but he has a meltdown worth watching.
Hey guys, this is the Einstein Wall Street from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, greatest financial institution in the world, or whatever is left of absolute, utter madness here today. I don't know, really. This makes absolutely no sense. There's absolutely no reason for this to be happening. Absolute irresponsibility. The way this story has been disseminated, nobody knows anything more about tariffs than they did yesterday, except some insane number came out that was figured out by, I don't know, putting two apples, 2 carrots, and a bag of cashews together, dividing it by 2, multiplying by 9, and coming up with a number that absolutely has decimated the stock market. I don't use this word crash lightly, but this was a mini crash, down 5% in my book. Dow Jones Industrial Average closing at the low, down 1,700 points. The S&P 500 closing down 277 handles. That is insane. Everything on that screen is green. Everything on that screen is red. It is bleeding. I have a red-green deficiency. I'm colorblind. That's the only silver lining of the day. I thought it was green. Look at that. You see that? That is what you call blood in the friggin' streets. Everything. Russell down 134. Oil down 8%. I mean, what we got promised? Narrative about tariffs. We got promised prices would go lower. We were promised that this was going to get worse for a little while, but it'll all come out in the wash. I mean, come on. That's absolute friggin' insanity. This is irresponsible. Absolutely irresponsible. After 6 weeks of a completely confused messaging, okay, to then come out yesterday and lay down, unpack this bag of friggin' dirty laundry that made no sense whatsoever. Absolutely no clarity, no direction, no nothing. And look, the market's telling you what it thinks. Are you telling me that this works for anybody? Anybody can look at this and go, this is the way it was supposed to be? This is the vision I had? Come on. Absolutely ridiculous. Irresponsible is the best word I can use to describe it.
And he just goes on screaming like that for like another minute and a half. Just ridiculous, irresponsible meltdown. Has your life been destroyed by the stories you have heard in the news about stock market crashes? Are you feeling it? Is your life being destroyed? Now, it's funny because there are people out there, by the way, whose retirement funds are heavily invested in these tech stocks, and how those were doing yesterday or 3 days ago relative to how they're doing today. Well, they're probably worse, but it's not like they were necessarily just going to go up forever based on these 7 tech stocks that have held up the stock market for years. This is one of the normies on the All In podcast, Chamath Palihapitiya, I think might be how you say his name, and I'm not trying to mispronounce it. Sometimes I am trying to mispronounce names, but not this time. He said, this was today, the stock market is crashing. Trump has ruined everything. This is the end. Or to quote the great Dave Chappelle, and hear me out when I say this, you could shut the F up. The stock market has simply wrung out Biden's last gasp of free money before he lost the election. We are back to where we were a year ago. We're back to where we were a year ago. Oh, no, the horror. Now, by the way, Joe Biden wasn't actually president, and there wasn't actually an election. So, as I said, one of the normies on the All In podcast, they don't understand these things, apparently. They believe that Joe Biden really received 81 million real lawful American votes, and now they don't believe that anymore, but they still believe he was president. And they just think maybe some mistakes were made. Oh, they rigged the system. Oh, we know that Joe Biden won a rigged election, but he was still really a president. Very patriotic, friend. Very patriotic. You couldn't have figured that out on November 4th of 2020 and then actually opposed the installation of an illegitimate president. You couldn't have done that because, that would threaten our democracy, our institutions, blah, blah, blah. But congratulations, guys. It is good that you are not freaking out and rather opposed to the freak out. Here is the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell.
Tariffs will be working their way through our economy and are likely to raise inflation in coming quarters. Reflecting this, both survey and market-based measures of near-term inflation expectations have moved up. By most measures, longer-term inflation expectations, those beyond just the next few years, remain well anchored and consistent with our 2% inflation goal.
So inflation, and I actually forgot to discuss this the other day when we were talking about Hakeem Jeffries and his recession day. It's not liberation day, it's recession day. To the extent there is an actual problem, it would be due to inflation, and that would be because the global regime bankers are messing with the currency and with the economy. And some of that is going to have to be expected. And again, all this has been baked into the cake for a really long time. We went through the first part of this cycle in 2020. We're going through the next part of it right now. And these things were planned as part of the Great Reset and have to be accounted for and counter-planned against if we are to hijack that Great Reset. We can hope that we're not just being dog-walked into a far worse version of dystopia than any of us could have ever imagined with Donald Trump leading the charge. I don't believe that. I know most of you, or I know all of you don't believe that. There are some that do believe that. And it's always premised on the case that Donald Trump is a Zionist and he's doing the Zionists' bidding and blah, 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 blah. That argument, I think, is dismissible, out of hand, but people are going to stick to that for as long as it takes Donald Trump to make it clear that being Israel first is not being America first. And some people might have thought maybe he did that the other day when he imposed a 17% tariff on Israel. Interesting choice of amounts. But of course, that's not enough, because the counter narrative to people who have been red-pilled on some of these globalism issues, the opt to take them way too far and to actually cement in the American consciousness that Trump really is Hitler and that MAGA really are Nazis, well, they're going full pro-Nazi, and even Donald Trump is not anti-Israel enough. He is simultaneously Hitler and not Hitler. So anyhow, let us continue forward. But inflation, there could be elements of inflation happening. We saw a bunch of that during the Biden administration, and eventually some of that will subside and come down. And the dollar, if it at some point gets pinned to Bitcoin, or Bitcoin becomes a primary currency, then the entire economic system becomes instantly deflationary. And we will see if that is what's ahead. I certainly can't predict that part of the future, though other people are well aware of that future already being real and being implemented. And again, I call your attention to information timelines, understanding that as much as we can glean from the information we are given, watching the markets, studying Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, studying American economics and our monetary system, we can do all of that work and still not be caught up to real time, knowing that there are people actually making and implementing decisions that we're not going to even catch sight of for years down the road. So whatever the status of things right now, the real status is still well out in advance of that, which is why I am a proponent of maximalist thinking. Okay, and I will eventually write and talk much more about that at some point in the future. But if you can understand the global regime's goals, and you understand that the global regime is the enemy, and it's that system of top-down centralized control that must be opposed at all times, well, then you figure out exactly what their ideal is down every single vertical you can detect it, and then figure out what the polar opposite of that is. And if you're able to do that successfully, upon finding that polar opposite, you should have a pretty good understanding of what your maximal position should be relative to that issue if your goal is opposing the global regime and the top-down centralized system of control. And if you're able to line up then 5 of those or 10 of those, and those all respond to a currency, for instance, a la Bitcoin, which is what I believe, and you don't have to, it's fine. Some people believe it's gold because they don't believe transmissibility is that big a priority. But if you are able to find the worst, a set of the worst possible outcomes that align with the global regime's ideals down a bunch of verticals, and you are able to locate some approximate polar opposite, then you can figure out what a maximalist choice to combat the global system would then be. And then it makes sense to be a proponent of those things in the real world that are visible as a collection of those ideals, those polar opposite ideals from the evil twins ideals, okay? Because we know that the entire thing is premised on an inversion. They want us to believe that bad is good and good is bad, because good for them is bad for us. So we have to adopt the mindset that what's good for us is actually whatever's good for them. And then we just do as we're told by the television, okay? I hope that makes sense. I think that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. And that might be one of those things that I have to run through a bunch of times. But that is the premise for my view of American maximalism. right? We can figure out what all the global regime's agenda-oriented needs are and then how to oppose that. And it turns out that a lot of the people in the founding age, not necessarily the ones that were taught about in government schools, took that approach. And I think that, again, I always cite the 10th Amendment Center. I think Michael Bolden over there and his team, they're doing a great, great job of bringing, kind of unearthing some of those important ideas from the founding era that we have been led to ignore throughout our lives. All right, let us continue. Donald Trump responded about the Fed today on Truth Social, saying, "This would be a perfect time for Fed Chairman Jerome Powell to cut interest rates. He is always, quote unquote, late, but he could now change his image and quickly. Energy prices are down, interest rates are down, inflation is down, and even eggs are down 69%. And jobs are up, all within 2 months. A big win for America. Cut interest rates, Jerome, and stop playing politics." Now, the egg prices that I see at the grocery store are not down 69%. And if they are for you, awesome, more power to you. I guess Donald Trump is right. From where you stand, from where I stand, they're not down, okay? And that's not an insult to Trump. They could be down at a different stage in the process, and maybe we're just having the prices hiked artificially for whatever reason. Totally possible. Or it's possible that Donald Trump is speaking one of these things into being, selling the program in a certain way. My egg prices are not down. We can be honest about these things, not accusing Donald Trump of lying. I don't know what statement he's making or what information he's working off of, but my firsthand experience is not that. This is a video that Donald Trump reposted himself today on Truth Social. And when you hear it, I think that the significance of Trump drawing everyone's attention to it will be abundantly clear. This is America Papa Bear on X, formerly Twitter. Here we are. Let me just switch screens here once again. Apologies. There we go.
Trump is crashing the stock market by 20% this month, but he's doing it on purpose. And this is why Warren Buffett just said Trump is making the best economic moves he's seen in over 50 years. Now, here's the secret game he's playing, and it could make you rich. So why is he doing this? To push cash into treasuries, which forces the Fed to slash interest rates in May, and those lower rates give the Fed the ability to refinance trillions of debt very inexpensively. It also weakens the dollar and drops mortgage rates. Now, it's a wild chess move, but it's working. Now, you're probably wondering, what about his tariffs? Well, I'll tell you, it's a genius play. It actually forces companies to build here to dodge them. It also forces farmers to sell more of their products here in the U.S. to bring grocery prices way down. We've already seen this with eggs. Now, remember, 94% of all stocks are owned only by 8% of Americans. So Trump, he's taking from the rich short term and handing it to the middle class through lower prices.
So how about that? That is quite an argument, and Donald Trump amplified that argument, which I have to assume means that he is in agreement with that argument and that he's making these moves for exactly these reasons. We will be seeing how these things evolve over the next couple of months. This is rather hilarious. I'm just calling your attention to a piece of this here article in the Washington Post. The headline, "Inside President Trump's whirlwind decision to blow up global trade." This is from this afternoon, and this quote has gone quite wide around the internet. I don't know how that happened. Here we are. Inside and outside the White House, advisors say Trump is unbowed, even as the world reels from the biggest increase in trade hostilities in a century. They say Trump is unperturbed by negative headlines or criticism from foreign leaders. He is determined to listen to a single voice, his own, to secure what he views as his political legacy. He's at the peak of just not giving a F anymore, said a White House official with knowledge of Trump's thinking. Bad news stories, doesn't give a F. He's going to do what he's going to do. He's going to do what he promised to do on the campaign trail. And we would expect no less. Of course, that is what Donald Trump is doing. That is how he has always operated. And it is a wonderful, wonderful thing. I would also mention in Donald Trump's brief press conference on Air Force One yesterday, he had this interesting moment. One of the reporters asked about something related to Signalgate, the whole Mike Waltz adding Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic to a Signal group chat about attacks against the Houthis, blah, blah, blah. And Trump immediately shot it down. In fact, maybe I can just pull this up quickly. I should be able to find this rather easily using the old transcript feature on YouTube, which comes in more handy than you could ever imagine. Let me see if, here we are. Okay, here we are. That wasn't too long a hold for processing.
When can that happen? On Pete Hegseth in this IG investigation, do you want to weigh in on that?
What is it?
There's an IG investigation into the Secretary of Defense's use of the Signal app.
Oh, is that you're bringing that up again? Don't bring that up again. Your editors remember, but that's such a wasted story. So what else?
Chinese farmland.
You're bringing that up again? Don't bring that up again. It's probably your editors. What a wasted story. What else? And he immediately moves on. That right there is not giving an F about bad news. That's as clear as it can be. He does not care about that Signalgate story. Not even going to answer questions. It's beneath him to answer fake news stories. And I'm not saying that the text chain is fake or whatever. It's just that the fake news has turned this minor issue that, as far as Trump's concerned, has been resolved into some multiple weeks long drama pass. I love it. I love it. I don't know what you want me to say. I know that reporters have the right to ask questions, but that question has been asked and answered. And the purpose of that question is just to prolong that drama in an attempt to make Trump and his administration look somehow irresponsible. And I think that we have probably all had enough of those sorts of things over these many years. I know I have. All right. So we talk often about these informational timelines. We talk often about how the things Donald Trump implemented in 2020 are only becoming visible now because we had this period, this pause in reality, essentially, or in the communication of that reality to us. And in the meantime, we had a number of fake stories all premised on a totally illegitimate government led by a fake and illegitimate president who didn't actually win an election. And during that time, we had fake elections. We had fake wars. I know it's not all fake. I know it's not all fake. But they communicate it to us in such fake ways all the time, and none of it is actually verifiable. So at some point, don't you have to wonder just how fake it is? Why is it fake at all? We're supposed to be getting real news, aren't we? If we're going to commit ourselves to fighting wars overseas and hating people to the point where we don't care if they're just indiscriminately bombed, we should at least know that the stories are true, but we don't, and we can't, because that's not how it works. Information just doesn't work that way. Yet we still proceed as if it does. Nonetheless, we can detect so many of these issues happening years ago or being told to us as though they are happening now, actually did happen years ago. And so we have this, the China response. That is one of the most prominent news stories of the day, and we'll get to that in just a second. But before we do that, this is from September 7th of 2020. Trump again raises the idea of decoupling the economy from China. And this was Reuters, the mouthpiece of the global regime. Trump talked about the decoupling throughout his first term. He had a deal in place with Xi Jinping. And then, gosh, the invisible enemy came out of China. The very deadly pandemic came out of a Wuhan lab, to the extent it was real, and it probably wasn't real, so it didn't come out of a Wuhan lab, but they were studying viruses there, so hey. With the election approaching, President Donald Trump on Monday again raised the idea of separating the U.S. and Chinese economies, also known as decoupling, suggesting the United States would not lose money if the world's two biggest economies no longer did business. So when you mention the word decouple, it's an interesting word. Trump told a labor news conference at the White House in which he vowed to bring jobs back to America from China. We lose billions of dollars. And if we didn't do business with them, we wouldn't lose billions of dollars. It's called decoupling. So you'll start thinking about it, Trump said. Trump, who long touted friendly ties with Chinese President Xi Jinping as he sought to make good on promises to rebalance a massive trade deficit, has made getting tough on China a key part of his campaign for re-election on November 3rd. He has accused his Democrat opponent, Joe Biden, who leads in most opinion polls, of being soft toward Beijing. If Biden wins, China wins, because China will own this country. Biden, for his part, has criticized Trump's Phase 1 trade deal with China, saying it is unenforceable and full of vague, weak, and recycled commitments from Beijing. We will make America into the manufacturing superpower of the world and end our reliance on China once and for all, whether it's decoupling or putting in massive tariffs like I've been doing already. We will end our reliance on China because we can't rely on China, Trump said. We will bring jobs back from China to the United States, and we will impose tariffs on companies that desert America to create jobs in China and other countries. So, decoupling from China in 2020, and now we are decoupling from China again in 2025. Isn't that incredible? How could it be that the things that happened then are also happening now? I know. 2020, very deadly pandemic, the summer of love, the fake election, Joe Biden's fake and illegitimate presidency, along with all of the other issues that we were shown on television. And they were shown in ridiculous ways. The Afghanistan withdrawal, we did withdraw from Afghanistan. I'm not saying we didn't. And I'm not saying that there weren't attacks during that withdrawal by the global regime on American forces. All of that could have happened. But still, the stories about that withdrawal and all the drama surrounding it had to be fake. The footage of the last plane out of Kabul was totally fake. And now people are recognizing it. All of a sudden, out of nowhere last week, there was just like a wave of people finally understanding that that was fake. Congratulations, everybody. Welcome to August of 2021. By the way, it just wasn't the last plane out of Kabul. Planes just kept leaving the airport as if nothing happened. But something definitely happened. And control over Afghanistan was returned to the Taliban, who immediately shut down the opium trade and then did photo shoots on those little pedal boats just around in a lake. Let's find Taliban paddle boats. I bet it brings me right to it. Oh, gosh, I love this headline right here. Yahoo News, bizarre Taliban photos emerge. Quote, this is real. There we have it. Look at these terrorists just out there paddling around this lake. Gosh, makes Afghanistan look like a lovely place. Taliban in Bamyan province. These photos are real. Well, how could they not be real? What do you have, like artificial intelligence image generation or something? Not in 2021. That just started last year. Crazy. Because, I mean, they give us the same capabilities they themselves have had for this long, right? Surely regime-oriented militaries and intelligence organizations didn't have access to image generation this entire time, or video generation. They can't just make things up and then show them to us and say, look at this. This thing happened on the other side of the world. Now we need to go to war. We wouldn't believe it if they did that. Yeah, we would. We believed exactly that bullshit for the last 100 years and been talked into all manner of retardation and chaos, destroying ourselves in the process because we are so easily hoodwinked as soon as they put pictures or video in front of us. Well, how could it be anything but real? What, are you not going to support America by believing that we have to go to war with people we just made up? Or if we didn't make it to space? And hopefully we'll get back to space by the end of the episode. But who knows how these things go? Donald Trump also signed an executive order on China on Wednesday. Here is the fact sheet from whitehouse.gov. Donald J. Trump closes de minimis exemptions to combat China's role in America's synthetic opioid crisis. Okay? So the fentanyl problem is blamed on China, even though Xi Jinping has quick trial and put to death all drug dealers. Trump actually got that idea from Xi Jinping. So how is it possible? Closing loopholes in the tariff system. Today, President Donald Trump signed an executive order eliminating duty-free de minimis treatment for low-value imports from China, a critical step in countering the ongoing health emergency posed by the illicit flow of synthetic opioids into the U.S. Following the Secretary of Commerce's notification that adequate systems are in place to collect tariff revenue, President Trump is ending duty-free de minimis treatment for covered goods from the People's Republic of China and Hong Kong starting May 2nd, 2025 at 12:01 a.m. Eastern. The People's Republic of China, he says. Imported goods sent through means other than the international postal network that are valued at or under $800 and that would otherwise qualify for the de minimis exemption will be subject to all applicable duties, which shall be paid in accordance with applicable entry and payment procedures. All relevant postal items containing goods that are sent through the International Postal Network that are valued at or under $800 and that would otherwise qualify for the de minimis exemption are subject to a duty rate of either 30% of their value or $25 per item, increasing to $50 per item after June 1st, 2025. This is in lieu of any other duties, including those imposed by prior orders. Okay? And so there were essentially these loopholes. And through those loopholes, we were being flooded with cheap Chinese goods. And this is an attempt to cut that off. And actually, you know what? Let me bring that back up and we'll go just down to the synthetic opioid related section there further down. Combating China's role in the opioid crisis. President Trump is targeting deceptive shipping practices by Chinese-based shippers, many of whom hide illicit substances, including synthetic opioids, in low-value packages to exploit the de minimis exemption. On average, CBP processes over 4 million de minimis shipments into the U.S. each day. That sounds like a financial windfall if all of those immediately begin seeing an import tariff. The Chinese Communist Party, which exerts ultimate control over the government and enterprises of the PRC, and again, think of the Chinese Communist Party in a one-party state as the American Uniparty, okay? That is the evil twin faction in China. It doesn't mean all of China is the CCP just because the CCP controls China to whatever extent. Just the same in America. The Uniparty still may control big parts of the American federal government. And as they say, so America goes to some extent. That doesn't mean it's the only faction in power in America. And we have Donald Trump opposing the Uniparty in America. And I think we can admit that Xi Jinping seems to be opposing the CCP in China and has gone after corruption within the CCP in a way you might expect Donald Trump to go after corruption here in America over the course of the rest of this term, and then maybe his next term, and maybe the term after that. So they exert ultimate control over the government and enterprises of the PRC, and he says they have subsidized and otherwise incentivized PRC chemical companies to export fentanyl and related precursor chemicals that are used to produce synthetic opioids sold illicitly in the United States. And they often talk about how that is done in Mexico. Many PRC-based chemical companies hide illicit substances in the flow of legitimate commerce, including through false invoices, fraudulent postage, and deceptive packaging. While the U.S. previously offered a generous de minimis exemption, China enforces strict import restrictions and tightly limits de minimis exemptions, showing no similar leniency toward U.S. shipments. And so, again, it's a reciprocal thing. Last fiscal year, CBP apprehended more than 21,000 pounds of fentanyl at our borders, enough fentanyl to kill more than 4 billion people. It is estimated that federal officials are only able to seize a fraction of the fentanyl smuggled across the southern border. These drugs kill tens of thousands of Americans each year, including 75,000 deaths per year attributed to fentanyl alone. And we used to compare the number of deaths during COVID to 9/11. So that would be, trying to do the math here. Quick math, 25 9/11s every year. More Americans are dying from fentanyl overdoses each year than the number of American lives lost in the entirety of the Vietnam War. My pal CanCon this morning on Badlands Daily had found this video, I guess on Twitter or something. This is Nancy Pelosi essentially making the MAGA argument on China and tariffs in 1996. And I think that this is worth adding to the show today. And so apologies if you already heard some of this morning.
How far does China have to go? How much more repression? How big a trade deficit and loss of jobs for the American worker? And how much more dangerous proliferation has to exist before members of this House of Representatives will say, I will not endorse the status quo? As I mentioned, it's about jobs, proliferation, and human rights. And there are those who say we shouldn't link human rights and trade and proliferation and trade. I disagree. But if we just want to take up this issue on the basis of economics alone, indeed, China should not receive most favored nation status for several reasons that I'd like to go into now. I'd like to call the attention of our colleagues to this chart on the status quo that the business community is asking each and every one of us to endorse today. Right now, we have a $34 billion trade deficit with China, the 1995 figure. It will be over $40 billion for 1996. Since the Tiananmen Square massacre, this figure has increased 1,000%, from $3.5 billion then to about $34 billion now. In terms of tariffs, I think it's interesting to note that the average U.S. MFN tariff on Chinese goods coming into the United States is 2%, whereas the average Chinese MFN tariff on U.S. goods going into China is 35%. Is that reciprocal? On exports, China only allows certain industries into China, of U.S. Industries into China, and therefore only 2% of U.S. exports are allowed into China. On the other hand, the U.S. allows China to flood our markets with a third of their exports, and that'll probably go over 40%. And it's limitless because we have not placed any restriction. In terms of jobs, this is the biggest and cruelest hoax of all. Not only do we not have market access, not only do they have prohibitive tariffs, not only are our exports not let in very specifically, but China benefits with at least 10 million jobs from U.S.-China trade. The president in his statement requesting the special waiver said that China trade supports 170,000 jobs in the United States, 170,000 jobs, whereas Our imports from China support 10 million jobs at least. Fact is that U.S.-China trade is a job loser. And one of the reasons that it is because well, first let me just make another point, and that is that our colleagues on the other side of this issue will say that trade with China, exports to China have increased 3 times in the last 10 years. They have. But they fail to mention that imports from China have increased 11 times, thereby leading to this huge trade deficit. The other issue, in addition, if intellectual property is a $2 billion, $3 billion loss, technology transfer is in the hundreds of billions of dollars. If you want to sell to China, your products into China, the Chinese insist that you open a factory there. They misappropriate your technology, open factories of their own, and then say to you, now we want to see your plan for export. That's as simply as I can say it briefly. But the fact is, this isn't about products made in America. The Chinese want American products that are made in China. And the most serious of these transfers of technology are in the airline industry, where Boeing tail sections of Boeing 737s were mostly made in Wichita, Kansas. Now they are made in Shen province, where workers make $50 a month. And they had the transfer of the technology and the transfer of the jobs has taken place. General Motors, Ford, they're all fighting to get in to build factories there so they can make parts there. They want MFN so they can get those parts back into the United States. So we are exporting not low-tech jobs and textile jobs. We're exporting our technology. Now, if you take a country the size of China with the very cheap, and in some instances, slave labor, the lack of market access, the rip-off of our intellectual property, the transfer of technology, a country that is not willing to play by the rules in any respect in this trade relationship, you have a serious threat not only to our relationship, but to the industrialized world. And if there's one message that I want our colleagues to understand today and our constituents is that on this day, your member of Congress could have drawn the line to say to the President of the United States, do something about this U.S.-China trade relationship that is a job loser for the United States. And this brings us to the point that others have said, well, we can't isolate China. Do you think for 1 minute that with 10 million jobs at least, and $35 billion and be over $40 billion this year in a trade surplus, all those billions of dollars in surplus, that the Chinese are going to walk away? Where are they going to take 35 to 40% of their exports? Who's going to buy them? This is what sustains the regime. The funding and the jobs, they can't have those people out of work. They have to be at work exporting to the United States.
Now that is really something. We should sign that lady up to sell the MAGA agenda. And actually, to be honest, Nancy Pelosi has sold her agenda so poorly that she actually has done a bang-up job on selling the MAGA agenda. Where are we? Okay, let's try to hurry through the rest of this trade stuff because there's just so much going on. I feel like I could go on all day. But I'm not going to do that because that is madness. This is the New York Times from this morning. Trump's trade war escalates as China retaliates with 34% tariffs. China has struck back at President Trump on Friday evening in Beijing in a rapid-fire series of policy announcements, including 34% across-the-board tariffs. China showed that it has no intention of backing down in the trade war that Mr. Trump began this week with his own steep tariffs on imports from around the world. China's finance ministry said it will match Mr. Trump's plan for 34% tariffs on goods from China with its own 34% tariff on imports from the United States. Separately, China's Ministry of Commerce said it was adding 11 American companies to its list of unreliable entities, essentially barring them from doing business in China or with Chinese companies. The ministry imposed a licensing system to restrict exports of 7 rare earth elements that are mined and processed almost exclusively in China and are used in everything from electric cars to smart bombs. The Commerce Ministry also announced it was beginning 2 trade investigations into American exports of medical imaging equipment, one of the few manufacturing categories in which the United States remains internationally competitive. And there was one other thing I wanted to get here. China's finance ministry issued a statement strongly criticizing Mr. Trump's tariffs, which will begin to take effect on Saturday and fully kick in next Wednesday. This practice of the U.S. is not in line with international trade rules, seriously undermines China's legitimate rights and interests, and is a typically unilateral bullying practice, the ministry said. And we can leave that one right there. So the international rules are breaking down Now they're going to hurt China. China is slapping us with reciprocal tariffs. And what are we going to do? I guess we're just going to stop buying cheap Chinese goods all the time. Or we might pay a little bit more for them. But the decoupling is in full effect, and that is the point. We want to decouple with them, and they're saying, fine, well, then we're going to decouple with you. That's like the old, there was this old kind of cliched scene in sitcoms. I remember growing up, and like I was watching after school television or whatever, or TGI Fridays, not TGI Fridays, the restaurant, but TGIF on, I think it was ABC or something. But there would always be like, the kid would get fired at work. The boss would be like, you're fired. And the employee would respond like, you can't fire me because I quit. And I was always like, well, that's dumb. You've already been fired. Oh, yes, it's just protests. Truth Social, Donald Trump. China played it wrong. They panicked. The one thing they cannot afford to do. Now, when Trump is talking tough about some of these other countries, the way I view this, good twin, evil twin faction, right? When he talks tough about Iran or North Korea or Russia or China or whoever, I am quite certain that Trump knows each one of these countries is two things. There is a global regime faction in China, and whatever power they have is being used to push global regime interests with China as the avatar, with China and their economy, however much they control of it, as the forcing function. The same thing they do in Venezuela. They don't control Nicolas Maduro, but they do control the parliament that they've set up and manufactured down there. And so that's the part of the Venezuelan government that Trump is going after when he talks about going after the Venezuelan government. Maduro's the guy saying that Joe Biden and the DEA and the FBI set up Tren de Aragua and run this part of the problem. Okay. And so there's no way that I would ever believe Donald Trump and the people around him are unaware of these dynamics. And so then it's just a matter of how they communicate them. Okay. And then communicating them this way is not only accurate because they're referring to the evil twin faction in these countries, but it also protects them from the claim that Donald Trump is a partner to these particular regimes, which we are told across the board are despotic, authoritarian, communist, socialist, leftist, whatever regimes, regardless of the truth or falsity of that claim. Okay. All that matters in good twin, evil twin is whether or not the particular actor or company or country or regime or whatever it is in league with the global regime and moving toward that top-down centralized control, or if they are moving toward decentralization, fragmentation, and the emergence of the multipolar, sovereign, nationalist world order. And I believe that that is what we are seeing. Okay. Gem for me, Rumble Rant, $10. Hi, Chris. Can you post some of the links to the chat? I'm fighting a narrative war over here. Yes, I've often thought about how best to do that. I've thought occasionally about putting it in show notes, but it's relatively disorganized in the way that I go through these things. It's just in my like Apple Notes. And so without taking extensive additional time to organize those, I feel bad about putting them in the show notes. And truth be told, I'm not going to take that additional time. I will refer you, though, to Telegram, to the information stream, t.me/very reasonable. The Telegram app is the best app for transmitting information that I have ever used. I think it is by far the best. I don't think anything else is anywhere close, not even X, formerly Twitter. And in that information stream, you can use the search feature and then search these terms. And I always try to make a point of reading out the entire headline from these links. So if you just type that into a search engine, you should find the link pretty quickly. if I think of a better way to do this, then I will. But as I made clear last week on the show, I'm going to be scaling back from doing shows for a few months to focus on writing for the Substack, but also for books. So I don't think that this is going to be a problem for much longer. And then by the time I come back, maybe we'll have a different workflow or something. We shall see. But thank you for the comments. I know that that's important. I wish there was a great way to just put a number of links up at once. Unfortunately, beyond putting them in the show notes. And by the way, they wouldn't even fit in most podcast app show notes. So it's not a perfect solution no matter how I approach it. But I understand the concern, and I do think about that. Real Purdy won $50. Thank you. Chris, thanks for keeping us entertained and updated. Your perspective on current events is helpful. Have a great weekend and best wishes on writing your new book and taking a rejuvenating sabbatical. And thank you very much, Real Purdy. That is exactly what I will be doing. Someone just asked how to gift subscriptions. If you mean on Rumble, I think you just have to hit that little present icon right below the chat entry area on the web version. I'm not sure on the mobile version of the app. Okay. So the China decoupling is clearly happening in a major way at this point. And speaking of things that were done 5 years ago and were just being told are done now, Donald Trump this afternoon, on Truth Social addresses TikTok and its relation to China. And we actually heard him address that on Air Force One yesterday as well. He said maybe there's room for negotiations with China about this TikTok thing. So it's all just leverage and negotiation. Always. Trump is always mid-negotiation. My administration has been working very hard on a deal to save TikTok, and we have made tremendous progress. The deal requires more work to ensure all necessary approvals are signed, which is why I'm signing an executive order to keep TikTok up and running for an additional 75 days. We hope to continue working in good faith with China, who I understand are not very happy about our reciprocal tariffs necessary for fair and balanced trade between China and the USA. This proves that tariffs are the most powerful economic tool and very important to our national security. We do not want TikTok to, quote unquote, go dark. We look forward to working with TikTok and China to close the deal. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Well, alrighty then. What do they have brewing on TikTok? Well, let's take a look at Reuters from just today. Walmart considers joining investor group to buy TikTok. ABC News reporter says. Wow. Well, where did the rest of this article go? Apparently there isn't one. Walmart is considering joining a group of investors, ABC News reporter Selena Wang said in a post on X Friday. So I guess that is the start and the end of that reporting. But how about this? From August 27th, 2020, Walmart is teaming up with Microsoft on TikTok bid. Amazing. This is 5 years ago. And the same thing's happening today. How does it happen? Walmart said Thursday it's teaming up with Microsoft in a bid for TikTok. The retail giant confirmed to CNBC that it's interested in buying the popular short-form video application. TikTok's Beijing-based parent company ByteDance is nearing an agreement to sell its U.S., Canadian, Australian, and New Zealand operations in a deal that's likely to be in the $20 billion to $30 billion range, sources say. It has not yet chosen a buyer, but could announce a deal in the coming days, the sources said. With Walmart's confirmation, it joins several others trying to acquire the tech company, including Oracle. Okay. And we know, by the way, that Oracle ended up housing all that data. Are we going to hear at the end of this whole process that Oracle bought TikTok? I think we probably will, but we shall see. I think it also might end up under TMTG, now just DJT, Truth Social, and that whole network. Why do I think that? Because it was reported years ago that Jeff Yass has $20 billion in TikTok. Jeff Yass was one of the people getting drained in the Ron DeSantis op. And Yass also has money in Truth Social. Just saying. What an announcement that will be, by the way. And will we get that in 75 days? Trump just keeps bleeding them out with these delays, delay after delay after delay. 5 years in the making. Walmart is pursuing the acquisition at a time when it's trying to better compete with Amazon. It plans to launch a membership program called Walmart Plus soon. The subscription-based service is the retailer's answer to Amazon Prime, which includes original TV shows and movies. And so they want to capture the retail aspect and have a platform where the users of that platform are creating content and advertising Amazon products within that platform. They're trying to there are all these competitors for what might end up being the so-called everything app like WeChat in China. We just heard last week that Amazon was back in the mix because they want to add a retail element to their TikTok purchase. And let's just go through this highlighted section and then we'll move on. In a statement, the big box retailer said TikTok's integration, and again, this is from 2020, of e-commerce and advertising, quote, is a clear benefit to creators and users in those markets, end quote. It did not say how it would use TikTok or whether it would be part of Walmart Plus. We believe a potential relationship with TikTok US in partnership with Microsoft could add this key functionality and provide Walmart with an important way for us to reach and serve omnichannel customers, as well as grow our third-party marketplace and advertising business. We are confident that a Walmart and Microsoft partnership would meet both the expectations of U.S. TikTok users while satisfying the concerns of U.S. government regulators. And the expectations must be that they steal all of their data all the time. The deal, if approved, would give Walmart and Microsoft access to hundreds of millions of consumers who could buy their products or become a lucrative audience for ads. In a filing this week, TikTok said it has nearly 100 million monthly active users, in the U.S. That's up nearly 800% from January 2018. Daniel Ives, managing director and technology analyst at Wedbush Securities, described TikTok as a huge shot in the arm for Walmart's e-commerce business. And all of this analysis is still entirely relevant, which is why I'm going through it. When you think right now about going up against the 800-pound gorilla, Amazon, obviously they've been behind the 8 ball. But Walmart could use this as a golden opportunity to partner with Microsoft and monetize the TikTok base, which could start to rival Instagram in the next few years, just given its global presence. And all of this is particularly interesting because it's happening at the same time that we are decoupling from China and beginning to close the de minimis loophole and affect Chinese shipping and import tariffs. All of that matters because if you were to list the 2 companies, and there are basically only 2 of them, that have taken advantage of the low prices on Chinese goods more than everyone else. These 2 companies are literally famous for doing that. It's Walmart and Amazon. Just saying. Let us continue. All right. We are ripping and tearing. Maybe we'll get through the whole thing. Probably not, but maybe. This is from yesterday in The Hill. White House defends not including Russia, North Korea on tariffs. Oh, no. The White House defended its decision not to include Russia, North Korea, Cuba, or Belarus in the latest round of tariffs, which targeted dozens of global trading partners that were labeled the worst offenders when it came to trade barriers. A White House official told The Hill in a statement that the 4 nations are not subject to the reciprocal tariff executive order because they are already facing extremely high tariffs, and our previously imposed sanctions preclude any meaningful trade with these countries. The official added that Trump has recently threatened to impose strong sanctions on Russia to further explain leaving out Moscow. And people got really upset at that. They said, this is proof that Trump is a Russian agent. A few weeks ago, the same people making those complaints were also saying that Donald Trump was a Russian agent because when he imposed or when he proposed sanctions and tariffs on Russia, they said, we don't really trade with Russia anyway. But now he's a Russian agent for imposing those tariffs that before were pointless because we didn't actually trade with them. Doesn't matter what it is. Trump's always the bad guy. And he's always a Russian agent. Everything proves that Trump is bad. Everything proves that Trump is a Russian agent. Everything proves that Trump is a narcissist. Everything proves that Trump is just in it to make money. The same narratives for 10 years. We are 2 months away, 2 months and 10 days away from the anniversary of Trump sliding on down that golden escalator. 10 years. It's crazy. 75-day extension on the TikTok ban, by the way, puts us at January 20th. Okay? So just a week after Trump's birthday, the Flag Day, the anniversary of the coming together of the Continental Army in 1775, and somewhere around the official beginning of America's 250th birthday, as promised by Donald Trump. And I expect that he will probably stick to those dates. Coincidence? No. 10-year plan? Yeah. How can you plan for 10 years and still have all the events be real and spontaneous in the world? The answer is you can't. And you know what sort of situation enables that? When the news ain't real, people believe it anyway. At that point, you can really make anything you want happen in the world, can't you? Matter of perspective, I suppose. What about Canada? Canada and Mexico were left off the tariff list. Carney says Canada will fight back as Trump takes trade war to the world. This is from CBC, which is Canadian BBC. All the same regime. All the exact same regime. Down here, just before announcing his latest round of tariffs this afternoon, Trump said he saw it today as one of the most important days in American history. It's our declaration of economic independence, he said from the Rose Garden. Now, I just wanted to point this out. As we've detailed here, Canada and Mexico escaped those reciprocal tariffs today on account of CUSMA, the free trade agreement. But steeper tariffs and a broken alliance remain. That is the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, the USMCA. These dirty Canadians call it the CUSMA, prioritizing themselves. How dare they? That doesn't sound like the sort of behavior one would expect from the people wishing to be our 51st state. And settle down, Canadians. I know that you don't want that. Although some of you probably do. And some of you probably realize that it's already happened. Just kidding. You are still the subjects of the British monarch, King Charles III. He of the swollen hand and the decaying head, I guess. I don't know. He's our king. I mean, and, you know, making fun of kings, making fun of presidents, making fun of doctors and lawyers, where does it stop? We keep just giving titles to people and then holding them up on pedestals. Oh, this person in the white coat, this priest of the religion of scientific materialism and neo-Kabbalah. This priest, he is the person who should be trusted. Trust the science, trust the doctors. Trust the politicians. They are the people's representatives. These people are duly elected. Trust the president. Well, we can trust the president right now, I guess. Have we ever been able to trust a president before in our lifetimes? The answer is no. What about Jack Kennedy? Well, suit yourself, I guess I would say. Suit yourself. Okay. Continuing on. Places that did not escape Donald Trump's tariffs. This is CBS News. Trump's tariffs target Heard Island and McDonald Islands, Australian territory inhabited by penguins. With his announcement of widespread new tariffs on Wednesday, President Trump spared very few places in the world from his effort to upend global trade. Not even the remote Heard Island and McDonald Islands, a sub-Antarctic Australian territory inhabited by penguins, but no people. The tariffs were listed among the nations and territories hit by the Trump administration's universal 10% tariff, along with mainland Australia. Managed by the Australian government's Antarctic division, the islands are unoccupied by humans and remain one of the world's least anthropogenically disturbed areas. And I guess that is a very complicated way of saying not messed with by humans, according to an official website, and that would never be lying. Due to the extreme isolation of Heard Island and McDonald Islands, together with the persistently severe weather and sea conditions, human activities in the region have been and remain limited, the Australian government website explains. Terrestrial and marine research undertaken as part of the Australian Antarctic Science Program is currently the main human use of the marine reserve, while commercial fishing in the adjacent HIMI fishery, and I assume that means Heard Island, McDonald Island, is the most frequent activity in the region. And look at those happy penguins. How dare Trump tariff the penguins? And blah, 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 Antarctic. Also, Norfolk Island, another Australian territory with a population of just over 2,000, was hit with an even greater tariff of 29%, nearly 3 times higher than the Australian mainland. Oh no, he is going to crush the economy of Norfolk Island's 2,000 people. How dare he? And look at this. This looks 100% real and like one of those things that you'll see in an article from the Daily Mail about how you can buy an entire Italian castle village for like $450,000. And I keep thinking, man, that is what I need to do someday. I need to get wealthy enough to buy an entire Italian castle village and restore it, and not a single dime more of wealth. That is all I need. And then I will just forage for food as long as I have my castle. Seems like a really good plan as far as I'm concerned. Now, while we are talking about strange and remote places, let us go to what the heck? It didn't bring me to the right link. Donald Trump, just an hour ago, on Truth Social posted, "Only the weak will fail." Very bold. I'm into that. I plan on not being weak, and I plan on not failing. In fact, I plan on landing myself that Italian castle village for the very reasonable price of $450,000 or something. This is what I was looking for. Donald Trump on Truth Social just had a very productive call with To Lam, General Secretary of the Communist Party of Vietnam, who told me that Vietnam wants to cut their tariffs down to zero if they are able to make an agreement with the U.S. I thanked him on behalf of our country and said I look forward to a meeting in the near future. The Communist Party of Vietnam, how about that? Trump is going to be wheeling and dealing with the Communist Party of Vietnam. I wonder just how communist they are, because we supposedly went over there to eliminate Chinese communism from Vietnam. But what was Chinese communism? Chinese communism was the global regime agenda put in place by the global regime, by global Zionists, just as they did in Russia. The communist regimes were all started by the quote-unquote West, And so that would be the evil twin faction in these nations. Did we go to Vietnam to oppose the same evil twin faction that was running our government when we went into Vietnam? That does not make sense. It is yet another one of these historical issues that we must reconsider in light of our understanding of total inversion within the false reality. We are told that those guys floating around on paddle boats in Afghanistan and shutting down the global opium trade for Big Pharma are terrorists. And then we were told that we were terrorists in 2021. That kind of tells you what the word terrorist actually means. Similarly, when we're told all the people opposing the global regime who claims to be capitalist despite having top-down centralized control over economies and manipulating currencies and controlling trade routes and resources and the media and the military, all in service of global communism. Those are the capitalists? Those are the free markets? That's free trade? That's patriotic Americanism? No. Total inversion within the false reality. We need to examine history through that understanding with the knowledge that the same people have been communicating it the entire time. And if you don't think Vietnam is subject to that, well, I guess we all got another thing coming. Sooner or later, over the course of these next few years, I may well go ahead and study that in some great depth. And every time I go back and look at an historical issue, through the lens, through the understanding of total inversion within the false reality, and through the lens of these falsified histories, you can immediately begin to unpack all of the bullshit. It's not that hard. In fact, you just go to the most pro-regime sources you can find and understand the inversions, and they're just admitting the entire thing. Take away the labels, remove the labels, ignore the labels. It then becomes, in my mind, pretty simple, but I'm crazy, you know? We talked a few months back while we are in Southeast Asia, in the Southeast Asia portion of the show, we talked a few months back about the supposed coup in South Korea. And as we get into this, it's once again important to acknowledge that South Korea is not a real country. South Korea is a U.S. occupation within the country of Korea. And we are still, Steve Bannon said that World War II is not actually over. The Korean War is not over. It's not even like you're saying that in some literary sense, right? Metaphorical sense or whatever, however the right way of saying that might be. It's not coming to mind right now. The Korean War just isn't over. Although it will be announced as being over, and Donald Trump will have facilitated the end of it, and that will have happened in 2019, but it will be announced as happening whenever it happens, maybe sometime this year or next year. And at that time, we'll think that it just happened then, but no, it happened back then. So it's just Korea, and then we have a false reality layer of the Korean government in South Korea under the U.S. occupation until that is fully removed, okay? And so understanding all those things, then we can think about this here. Wait, did I lose this clip somehow? I did not lose it. It's coming back, but I thought I had it downloaded. This is the problem with doing like 100 sources an episode. Hold for processing. Here we are.
Korea just kicked its president out of office. We're talking about Yoon Suk-yeol, the one who declared martial law back in December.
주문, 피청구인 대통령 윤석열을 파면한다.
And what we're seeing right now,
that just said that Yoon is dismissed.
Huge huge range of emotion. Opponents of President Yoon literally dancing in the street, some of them crying. But his conservative
Interesting that they have yellow vests on, isn't it?
supporters, many with Stop the Steal signs, are devastated, saying they think the president is being stolen from them.
Now, that lady is acting. No one cries like that.
The bottom line today, South Korea's highest court...
Except for, to be perfectly honest, that meme lady, I think it's a lady, from Trump's first inauguration. That was hilarious. that crying liberal that's in all the memes.
Court said when Yoon tried to impose martial law, that violated the Constitution. So he is done being president, effective immediately. And as for what happens now, there's going to be an election within 60 days to pick a new president. Until then, the prime minister is in charge. Yoon, though, still faces a criminal trial for his martial law declaration, and he could ultimately face years in prison. Yoon is South Korea's second president to be removed through impeachment after President Park Geun-hye in March of 2017. And looking ahead, South Korea faces new stiff U.S. tariffs, so the country will have to elect a new president, one who could go toe-to-toe with the Trump administration.
Man, I wonder what happens if he can't go toe-to-toe with the Trump administration after those fake elections are held in quote-unquote South Korea and then broadcast to the world as some legitimate government, though it will not be. It's just going to be Korea. It's just going to be Korea. The same way that the eastern third of Ukraine and Crimea are Russia, the same way that Hong Kong is China and Taiwan is China and Guyana is Venezuela. It's just Korea. The maps are being undrawn because the people who drew the maps had no business drawing them. And they enforced the lines on those maps with the U.S. war machine and with economic manipulation, media manipulation, control over resources, and control over trade routes. It is always the same program everywhere. And once we recognize the program, the trick becomes impossible to pull off. The only problem is that most people are still fully invested in that system and in that understanding, which makes the opposite understanding seem absolutely crazy to people who absolutely don't know anything at all about anything, though some of them have spent a considerable amount of time memorizing fake news and fake histories. This is the Daily Mail from this morning. Texas rocked by swarm of 4 earthquakes in less than 6 hours. Texas earthquakes. What the F? Now, we talked about earthquakes last week. We talked about very natural disasters last week. And I would bet that a bunch of people thought, hey, that guy's crazy for talking about how the building in Bangkok obviously didn't fall down due to an earthquake with an epicenter 640 miles away, because that's impossible. That can't happen. It's dumb as shit to believe that it did happen. Okay? That aside, the earthquake in Myanmar was immediately framed as some failure of the military junta that controls the government of Myanmar, formerly Burma. Oh, man. Whenever very natural disasters are immediately used for a political purpose and the very natural disaster can be created by unnatural means, assume it's the unnatural means. And then, of course, we had the stories about airstrikes and bombing runs in the same places that the earthquake hit, which makes it all that much harder to believe that any of the earthquake story in Myanmar was more than a cover story for other events and an attempt to make the regime, the military regime there that kicked out the global regime, look bad. Okay? Now, to this Texas story. So no damages or injuries have been reported, just so that everyone understands we're not making light of a tragedy. While West Texas has several fault lines, the earthquakes were likely caused by induced seismicity. Earthquakes triggered by human activities, particularly oil and gas operations. Those operations cause quakes mainly through wastewater injection, which increases underground pressure and lubricates faults, making them more likely to slip. So we were just told that those are man-made earthquakes. Can that happen? Yep. Some people have researched this rather deeply. I'm not sure if Michelle's in the chat or watching today, but she was posting a bunch of stuff in Telegram on research she had done in 2021 on man-made earthquakes. Now, she suggests that it's about the depth of the seismic activity. I would suggest that that is already maybe trusting the science a little too much to assume that they are either recording that correctly or reporting it correctly. I would never give that assumption, and I would assume the absolute worst in every situation about the regime until proven otherwise. And they won't prove otherwise. And until they stop this sort of activity, I'm going to keep assuming the worst. Okay? So, earthquakes, man-made. Just like those wildfires can be man-made. Polymath Anon in the chat says not from fracking. Interesting. Bay Theater Dave says the account Dutch Sint, S-I-N-S-E, has been all over these earthquake swarms. Says Texas was perforated from drilling, just a matter of time, according to 626. So, anyhow, by all means, share that information, dig into it, whatever you want to do with it. I'm just saying, you think it's crazy that earthquakes could be caused by man. It's not crazy. Also, I guess, to the extent of explosions underground or maybe even above ground, if the earth is shaking, that could be recorded as seismic activity. I don't know the answer. Okay, I'm not trying to insinuate or imply in any way that I do know the answer, but I know that it's not what we are led to believe, or at least at the very minimum that there is the potential for much more going on. Okay, so let's switch subjects completely. I found this very interesting. I imagine we will probably have some discussion of this tomorrow night on Devolution Power Hour. NSA Director and Cyber Command Chief Timothy Hoff, and I'm going to say it like that. It might be Haw. I think it's probably Hoff. Deputy Wendy Noble fired in major shakeup at wiretapping agency, according to reports. This is the New York Post from yesterday. The director of the National Security Agency, Air Force General Timothy Hoff, reportedly was fired Thursday from his post as the head of the agency. Hoff's removal as director of the NSA, the nation's primary cyber espionage and electronic eavesdropping agency, comes on the same day that at least 3 White House National Security Council staffers reportedly were also shown the door. The ousted NSA director's civilian deputy, Wendy Noble, was also let go Thursday, according to the Washington Post, citing current and former U.S. officials. Noble was reassigned to a role within the Pentagon's Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, according to the outlet. The reason behind the NSA shakeup is unknown, the U.S. officials told the outlet. Hoff, who also serves as the Pentagon's Cyber Command Chief, has led the NSA since February 2024. It's unclear if the Air Force General will remain at his Cyber Command post following his removal from the Fort Meade, Maryland-based spy agency. And if I'm not mistaken, Fort Meade is also where Hammer and Scorecard are believed to be run from. Take that as you will. Department of Government Efficiency Chief Elon Musk was hosted by Hoff at NSA headquarters just last month, his first known visit to a U.S. intelligence agency. Lieutenant General William Hartman, Hoff's deputy at Cyber Command, will take over as acting director of the NSA, according to the Washington Post. Mark Warner, the ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, slammed Hoff's dismissal. Mark Warner is a Democrat. General Hoff has served our country in uniform with honor and distinction for more than 30 years, at a time when the United States is facing unprecedented cyber threats, as the Salt Typhoon cyber attack from China has so clearly underscored. How does firing him make Americans any safer? Well, I guess we would just have to take your word for it, Mark Warner. But we can't take your word for it because you are a communist and a liar. It is astonishing that President Trump would fire the nonpartisan, experienced leader of the NSA while still failing to hold any member of his team accountable for leaking classified information on a commercial messaging app, even as he apparently takes staffing direction on national security from a discredited conspiracy theorist in the Oval Office, Warner wrote in a separate post, that being Laura Loomer. So he has lied in that very post. Was there classified information in the Signalgate leaked chat to Jeffrey Goldberg? No. The answer is just no. So he's making that up to make a point. As similarly with the Salt Typhoon cyber attack, they can tell us that that's Chinese. They can tell us that comes from anywhere. What difference does that make? Cyber attack. It can be located anywhere and everywhere all at once. And that does not mean that China did that. Okay? Good twin, evil twin doesn't even allow for that sort of interpretation. It's moronic, but it is useful to Mark Warner. And it's useful as a selling point to us, because if we fail to recognize the good twin, evil twin dynamic, and instead we just focus on China did it, well, then then it immediately sounds like Mark Warner is saying to us, hey, our adversary that you understand as our adversary, they're cyber attacking us. And now Trump is weakening us in relation to our adversary. Well, why would Trump do that? While we know that Trump is actually the only person taking the fight to the global regime. Would he do both things? No, of course he wouldn't. Well, then that indicates something else is going on. So who are we going to listen to? Donald Trump or Mark Warner? And of course, the answer is obviously Donald Trump. Now, let's go quickly through a couple of posts from the great Ezra Cohen on Timothy Hoff. These are from X, formerly Twitter, yesterday in response to this news. Cohen wrote, sharing this very New York Post article, Timothy Hoff and Wendy Noble, two bureaucrats who had a strained understanding of the chain of command, resisted efforts to focus on countering the threat of narcotics. Glad to see they have been removed. Now, I don't know what he's referencing in the chain of command comments, but it could be that the same thing that Laura Loomer communicated, which is that Hoff is committed to Mark Milley, and that part of the chain of command, disobeying the president, listening to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That could be what he's referring to, though I do not know. Cohen also mentioned on X, formerly Twitter, last night in response to this news, WAPO freaking out that they've lost all their sources at NSA. So he is directly accusing them of leaking to the media. And potentially you can combine that with the other, in opposition to President Trump, on behalf of Mark Milley or other elements of the global regime. Another post from Ezra. With Nakasone's protege, Tim Hoff, out, President Trump should immediately move to end the NSA CYBERCOM dual hat once and for all. He had one more post on that, and then we will talk a bit about the dual hat. A woman named Nicole Perlroth posted, and Ezra is responding. And I think maybe she is a New York Times reporter. I don't know. Has a podcast, says she led cyber at NYT. Okay. She writes, if you know General Hoff, You know he is the best possible person to lead NSA and Cyber Command. If this firing is true, we are entering a new phase, and every American should be deeply, deeply concerned. Only loyalists at scale. So she is essentially admitting that Hoff would have been in opposition to Donald Trump, and she is upset that Trump is letting him go because now there will be only loyalists, apparently. And this is the assertion that apparently the President of the United States and Commander-in-Chief, the Commander-in-Chief of the military, the very top of the chain of command, does not deserve loyalty down the chain of command. These people are insane. Really is amazing. In response, Ezra Cohen. I've never heard of this lady. She claims to have led cyber at the NYT, whatever that means. In any event, anyone who definitively says NSA should be led by a military officer who is dual-hatted as the commander of CYBERCOM has questionable judgment, okay? And so let's get into the dual hat problem. And it's really interesting. And I'm not saying I've reached the bottom of this. I have not. This is something that we've looked into a few times over the years. This is Axios from August 18th, 2017. Trump elevates Cyber Command. Trump approved an Obama-era plan Friday to elevate Cyber Command, currently housed at the National Security Agency, to be a unified combatant command. This shows the U.S. is getting serious about dealing with cyber warfare. The move will also help the U.S. bolster its cyber weapons so it can match Russia's capabilities, 3 U.S. officials told Reuters, and improve America's ability to interfere in foreign adversaries' military programs when necessary. This move shakes Cyber Command up a bit and gives it some operational independence, although it's not entirely separate from the NSA yet. Trump's announcement raised the possibility that it could eventually be entirely split off, which would grant it new powers as a standalone unit reporting directly to Defense Secretary James Mattis at the time. Then it would be the 10th Unified Command in the U.S. military. Commands are organized by region, for example, Pacific Command, and responsibility, for example, Transportation Command, and report directly to the Defense Secretary. Okay? So, CYBERCOM would no longer be housed at the NSA. It would be separated. It would be just under the military, and the NSA would remain separate. And we'll get into the NSA's status in just a moment. Hold on, I'm just making sure I have my links set up here. Hold for processing. Here we go. Here we go. This is from Defense One, December 19th, 2020. Trump officials deliver plan to split up Cyber Command and NSA. So another thing that happened 5 years ago is actually happening now. Trump administration officials at the Pentagon late this week delivered to the Joint Chiefs of Staff a proposal to split up the leadership of the National Security Agency and U.S. Cyber Command. It is the latest push to dramatically reshape defense policy advanced by a handful of key political officials who were installed in acting roles in the Pentagon after Donald Trump, quote unquote, lost his reelection bid. A U.S. official confirmed on Saturday that Joint Chiefs Chairman Mark Milley, who along with Acting Defense Secretary Chris Miller must certify that the move meets certain standards laid out by Congress in 2016, received the proposal in the last few days. And does Milley actually have to weigh in? Does the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff actually have to weigh in? I wonder about that. With Miller expected to sign off on the move, probably by statute, obviously not by the Constitution, because the Joint Chiefs is not a constitutional position, as far as I know. With Miller expected to sign off on the move, the fate of the proposal ultimately falls to Milley, who told Congress in 2019 that the dual hat leadership structure was working and should be maintained. So Milley wanted dual hat. Nakasone wants dual hat. Hoff wants dual hat. Ezra Cohen opposes it. Trump opposes it. Chris Miller et al. Oppose it. Military officials have watched warily as Miller, his chief of staff, Kash Patel, and acting under Secretary of Defense for Intelligence, Ezra Cohen Watnick, all installed since Election Day, have sought significant policy changes with just over a month remaining in office. Recent outgoing administrations have declined to push through major changes during the transition period. The posts of NSA director and CYBERCOM commander are held by one person, currently General Paul Nakasone, in a dual hat arrangement, and the article goes on. One more on the dual hat. Where did it go? I posted this earlier in the info stream on Telegram, so you can certainly find it there. Defense scoop from July of 2023, CYBERCOM NSA nominee argues severing dual hat would be time-consuming, more complex, and less effective. And this here is General Timothy Hoff. He says, let's scroll down just a bit here. The signals intelligence and cyber operating environments substantially overlap. Eliminating the dual hat would reduce relevant visibility and understanding across both mission sets, increasing risk to intelligence sources and operational activities, Hoff wrote. It would reduce the speed and effectiveness of cybersecurity collaboration in the protection of national security systems, the DoD information network, and the defense industrial base by slowing and complicating information sharing and working with overlapping partners. Finally, ending the dual hat would complicate relationships with allies and partners that conduct their own signals intelligence and cyberspace operations. Hoff told senators Thursday, this is July 2023, during his confirmation hearing before the Senate Armed Services Committee, that having worked on each side of both organizations, quote, how we partner and be able to take guidance from a single leader becomes effective in our response so we can move with the speed and agility today. And it would be very difficult to replicate that in a different configuration. Now, Ezra Cohen has a significant and prolonged dislike for Paul Nakasone and calls Timothy Hoff his protege. And I forgot to show you this article, but again, defensescoop.com is where you can find that. So he is arguing that these two things should be housed together because they have significant overlap. I asked ChatGPT what the Trump argument was for the NSA and CYBERCOM split. I first asked if it was considered an independent agency constitutionally. It said the official status was that it was established by executive order, a secret memo from President Truman in 1952, not by Congress. Its parent agency is the Defense Department, alongside agencies like the DIA and the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. The director is always a military officer, often dual-hatted as head of CYBERCOM. So it's not a quote-unquote independent agency. Here's the constitutional gray area. It was not created by Congress. So unlike the CIA, the NSA was never created through legislation. It was established by secret executive authority. That raises constitutional red flags, according to ChatGPT. It has secret budget and secret operations funded by the National Intelligence Program and the Military Intelligence Program. Most of its operations are classified. We know that about the surveillance, of course, because of Edward Snowden. Congress has oversight capabilities, but it's often superficial, and the NSA has been caught misleading or hiding activities. Despite the Fourth Amendment, the NSA has engaged in massive warrantless surveillance of Americans exposed by Snowden. In fact, they track absolutely all of our communication. The justification often comes from secret interpretations of laws like the Patriot Act, FISA, and executive orders, all of which arguably lack constitutional legitimacy. And of course, they do not override the Constitution. The Patriot Act must be unwound and removed. The NSA operates in tandem with private contractors and international spy networks, making it more a transnational surveillance node than a straightforward U.S. military agency. So wouldn't it then be really odd that the person running NSA is also the head of Cyber Command, part of the military, able to launch cyber attacks? And of course, they have dual use: cyber attack, cyber defense. Let us keep going. Where was the rest of my... Oh, sorry. Hold on now. I had an entirely alternate conversation with the old GPT here. Here we are. Let me... Pardon for the I thought I had another section to go through on that, but apparently I did not. Anyhow, so Space Force becomes an intelligence agency under Trump. It's created as the new branch of the military. It becomes an intelligence agency under Trump. Space Force deals with the space-based Cyber Command infrastructure and is part of the military. And so it is my working theory that when there isn't something that can simply be seized back from the global regime or not effectively seized back, and this NSA and its capabilities and its work with other intelligence agencies worldwide may fall under that umbrella, then what we need to do is build a parallel infrastructure. And I suspect and have suspected for a number of years that Space Force is that. I don't know that to be true. Okay, that is my speculation. That is my personal theory. You can adopt that theory or reject that theory. Polymath Anon in the chat said, who knew the hindsight of 2020 would be so prescient? Well, Polymath, my friend, that would be me because that was my idea. And I did all the research with that in mind. Let us continue. We're going to skip over some things. The Senate budget plan, there was some news on that this week. They're trying to push that through. Trump's big, beautiful bill. Lindsey Graham is kind of spearheading the legislative loophole that they're using to get around the slowdown processes there. Is that a surprise to people? Probably. Is Lindsey Graham doing that based on his relationship with Donald Trump and Trump's control over Lindsey Graham? Perhaps. Trump endorsed Lindsey Graham out of nowhere for seemingly no reason last week. And now all of a sudden, Lindsey Graham is taking a prominent role on doing what Trump wants done when it comes to the big, beautiful bill, also known as Mike Johnson's giant package. Oh, man. Oh, damn. We got to go through this. Oh, there's so many things. You know what? Maybe I want to save this election stuff for Monday. I'll save this election stuff for Monday and maybe the Norm Eisen stuff for Monday too. Because I had a whole Norm Eisen section and a whole election litigation based on the executive order section. But let us work our way out of this episode and we'll have some fun at the end rather than going into another entirely too deep information and analysis dump. Okay. Let us go to this in Reuters. And this is celebrity news in some sense, so people might think it's a little bit pointless to focus time on this stuff. On a show like this, I don't think it is. This is Reuters from today. UK police charge comedian Russell Brand with rape and sexual assaults. British police said they charged the actor and comedian on Friday with rape and multiple counts of assault in cases relating to 4 separate women between 1999 and 2005. Brand, who was once one of Britain's most high-profile broadcasters and is the former husband of U.S. pop star Katy Perry, denied the allegations when they first emerged in 2023 and said he had never had non-consensual sex. After the charges, Brand said on X that while he had been a fool when he was younger, what I never was a rapist. I have never engaged in non-consensual activity. He started his message by describing the law being used as a kind of weapon. And I would have to agree with him. These are 20 and 25, 26-year-old incidents that are supposedly the basis for actual charges on rape and sexual assault. Well, this is the UK. Their justice system is even worse than ours. It's hard I don't know if they have a different statute of limitations. It's hard to take this any more seriously than the E. Jean Carroll case with Donald Trump. It also sucks because if you are a famous celebrity and you have those kinds of morals, and I don't, it's a hard thing for me to judge because I've lived a similar lifestyle to that. But if you have access to women who want to have sex with you, and you don't have that moral barrier, then you're going to have sex with a lot of people. And 20 to 25 years later, those people deciding that they didn't get what they wanted out of that relationship and then accusing a man of rape just cannot be the substance for actual charges meant to convict that man and send him to prison. And we have now a rerun of the Me Too movement in its early stages. This is something that if you listen to the podcast regularly, you will have heard me predict 3, 4, 5 months ago, saying we're definitely going to have that in 2025. We will have a Me Too just like we had in 2017. Why? Because they're reruns. It's all reruns, okay? Informational timelines is one part of that. Then the rerun phenomenon is the other part of it. And rerun phenomenon is based on the fact that fake news is just a narrative. These are stories meant to create a collective belief and then collective action, okay? And for stories to have the emotional impact, make people suspend their disbelief, accept the story, accept the meaning, and then act in a certain way, the story has to fit a certain story structure. Meant to elicit an emotional response. And so the same story structure has to play out over and over and over again to elicit the proper emotional response and then the proper behavioral response. And so it's always going to be reruns. There's only the one set of stories, okay? And there might be 100 of them or 1,000 of them, but there's only that one set. They change in time. They change the details, the who, what, when, where, why, and how, okay? That stuff changes. The rest of the story and its structure is the same. They need these scandals because eventually they go after Donald Trump with these scandals. And they use it to, as we saw in 2017, remove leaders and prominent individuals from powerful positions. The media is important to them. They want to remove media figures. Russell Brand is an apostate in terms of the entertainment industry. Okay? He was on the team. Now he's off the team. Now, I'm not famous at all. Certainly not anywhere close to Russell Brand. But the phenomenon is the same in Hollywood. I opposed the entertainment industry to their faces, and they tried to destroy my life. Russell Brand is facing that on a much larger scale. So, man, without any actual evidence, I don't know how anyone can even take this story seriously, to be honest. Russell Brand put out a statement, not apologizing. He didn't apologize. He explained himself. And I think that that's the right way to put it. I don't think that I should attribute, I don't believe he has anything to apologize for, but here he is.
Firstly, thank you for these incredible and overwhelming messages of support. we're very fortunate in a way to live in a time where there's so little trust in the British government. We're very fortunate, I suppose, that this is happening at a time where we know that the law has become a kind of weapon to be used against people, institutions, and sometimes entire nations that will not accept and tolerate levels of corruption that are unprecedented. I'm speaking particularly to those of you that are watching this in the UK. How do you feel about your legal system right now? How do you feel about some of the high-profile cases that are not being pursued and prosecuted? How do you feel that the Southport murders were handled? How do you feel about the government of Keir Starmer? Now, that's just sort of general context. Me, I've always told you guys that when I was young and single, before I had my wife and family, who were just out of shot over there, my beautiful children, I was a fool, man. I was a fool before I lived in the light of the Lord.
You can see that however you want to see it. I don't know the man. I can't speak to his honesty or his integrity. I can't speak to his awakening or his newfound faith. But he declares it loudly and proudly with a big audience and has gotten a lot of blowback for it. So I'm inclined to give him the benefit of the doubt. This is, speaking of his former wife, Katy Perry, the ridiculous pop star. ABC News, how Katy Perry and Blue Origin's all-female crew are preparing for space. Desperate astronauts of Hollywood, apparently we have here. They did a photo shoot together. And this right here is Lauren Sanchez, Jeff Bezos's wife replacement, who I guess he's going to get married to, despite the fact that she's wearing someone else's face. That's Gayle King, Oprah Winfrey's girlfriend. And I don't know who the rest of these people are. But anyway, the countdown is on for an all-female crew headlined by singer Katy Perry to blast off to space on a Blue Origin rocket. For the April 14th flight on New Shepard, Perry will be joined by journalist Gayle King, former NASA rocket scientist Aisha Bowe, bioastronautics research scientist and civil rights activist Amanda Nguyen, filmmaker Carrie Ann Flynn, and journalist and helicopter pilot Lauren Sanchez, who is engaged to Blue Origin owner Jeff Bezos. Okay, who is flying the thing? Who's flying that thing? The helicopter pilot, Lauren Sanchez? That lady with that face is going to pilot a spaceship? Is that what we are meant to believe? Oh, no, it's going to be piloted completely by AI. It's going to be all automated. And if something goes wrong, then what? The all-female crew's mission to space will be the 11th manned spaceflight for New Shepard and the first all-female spaceflight crew since 1963, according to Blue Origin. The flight will last only around 11 minutes and reach a height of about 65 miles above Earth. The Kármán line, considered the boundary between Earth's atmosphere and outer space, is 62 miles, so Perry and her fellow crew members will not actually be launched into orbit. So they're going to just go up in the sky, but not through the firmament. Got it. They have been practicing, by the way. Flynn said, "I've done several zero-gravity simulation flights. They carve out a Boeing 747 and fly the plane in a parabolic pattern so that when the plane descends, everyone floats up. That was to get used to the feeling of weightlessness. So I think I'm going to have some fun with that when we're up. I also did NASTAR training in Philadelphia and experienced up to 5 Gs of pressure. Wowie, wowie, zowie." That's all I have to say about that.
Wowie, wow, wow, wow.
Wowie, wow, wow, wow. Where are we here? Speaking of Amazon and space, Jeff Bezos' Amazon quietly launches plan to take down Elon Musk. This is from this morning in thestreet.com. Bezos has stepped down from his CEO post and turned his attention to the stars. He now owns Blue Origin, a space technology company that's been bubbling in the news as of late after announcing that the crew of its New Shepard rocket ship's 31st mission would be all female, including these high-profile ladies. Even though Bezos has turned his attention to his newer business, that doesn't mean that Amazon doesn't have space flights of its own. Blah, blah, blah. Amazon's plans to take on Starlink. In an April 2nd post on its official site, Amazon announced that Project Kuiper, its broadband satellite network, is set for its first launch on Wednesday, April 9th. The mission, named KA-01 for Kuiper Atlas 1, will launch on a United Launch Alliance Atlas V Atlas 5 rocket, I suppose that's what that is, from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, Florida, and deploy 27 satellites at an altitude of 280 miles above the Earth. So apparently, as our parallel information infrastructure is being built out by Starlink, we are going to have a competitor. You can either buy internet from Elon Musk, or you can have Amazon internet once again, as we already had with Amazon Web Services. Sorry, was paying attention to something else. I got distracted for a brief moment. Why Project Kuiper is a threat to Starlink. When Elon Musk's Starlink first started to send its test satellites to space in 2018, there was no other major business dabbling in the satellite internet space, leaving generous room for Musk to make groundbreaking innovations. As of September 2024, Starlink has established more than 7,000 satellites in low Earth orbit and plans to deploy 12,000 more. Last year, Starlink announced that thanks to its efforts, more than 4 million people now have access to high-speed internet across 100-plus countries. And of course, it's probably far more than that now. So Starlink is no longer the major player in the scene, and Amazon is their competitor, so saith the street. Now, to wrap things up in space, we have the Fram 2. It shows off its popular polar orbit mission. The first humans to orbit Earth's polar regions showed off some impressive photos and videos of Earth's ice caps, X-rays, and more during the Fram 2 mission. You see, spaceships always just used to go around the Earth. Now it's going over. Here is one of these by one of the polar spacemen. Hello, Antarctica. Unlike previously anticipated from 460 kilometers above, it is only pure white. No human activity is visible. And here on your screen, you see this wonderful video. They cranked that window open by hand. Oh, look at it. No human activity is visible. All of this, of course, is 100% real.
Than I ever even expected. That's true. Let me show you. Let me show you. Oh my God! Check this out.
Wow. What an amazing picture of white stuff we got to see. You can only get footage like this from space. It's impossible to get footage like this from down here on the ground unless it's a Hollywood movie studio. And they don't use that in space. They never, ever show people space footage that was created in a Hollywood film studio, except for, moon landings and every other bit of anything space oriented we've ever seen, except for satellite imagery that just somehow NASA always has to adjust or use some sort of computer modeling or whatever to get those pictures. But besides all of those things, the rest of the pictures are totally from space, even though there are no rest of the pictures that are actually from space. It's only those edited ones. The ride to orbit was much smoother than I had anticipated. Apart from the final minute before SECO, I barely felt any G-forces. It honestly felt like just another flight. Well, that's probably just because you were on the ground. I had imagined it would feel like being in an elevator that suddenly drops, but that sensation never came. If I hadn't set free Tyler, the polar bear, zero gravity indicator, I might not have realized we were already weightless. I think being tightly strapped into our seat buckets made the transition less noticeable. And he goes on and on. Here are, look, spacemen. Nothing happening outside of them, just these screens, and then they crank up, open this hatch, and then whatever's outside of that. Oh, it's beautiful. Oh, it's amazing. I don't know what to say, man. I really don't. But apparently now we have observed the Earth's top and bottom from space. And just to close things out, let's get ourselves a soft landing via parachute. Does this look exactly like the one we saw 2 weeks ago when the spacemen were rescued from Gilligan's Island in space? Yes, of course it does. Let's speed this baby up. Elon Musk, chief spaceman, sent this out himself.
2 seconds.
Oh, it's so beautiful. Look at it drop. If there's one thing you can't fake, it's that. Oh.
Welcome home from 2. We have confirmation of splashdown of the Dragon spacecraft. Dragon has returned home with the From 2 crew.
Wowie. Wow, wow, wow.
Wow. Wowie, wow, wow, wow.
Amazing. Amazing. All right, everybody. I guess that is that. I'm taking a look in the chat. It seems we have a foreigner here. A normie wigging out. All right, everybody. I will be back on Monday at the same reasonable time on the same reasonable podcast network. I don't have a network. Masks and lockdowns don't work. They lied to you about a pandemic, and Joe Biden was obviously never president.
Well,
what?
You know who I am, don't you?
Well, you ain't Fiona Apple, and if you ain't Fiona Apple, I don't give a rat's ass.
What's wrong with being an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times? What do you think, Max?
Do you want to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times?
Yeah, I think I'd like to be an angry prophet denouncing the hypocrisies of our times.
It's not true. It's more true than I would perhaps prefer.
Can we stop this cruel game and allow the boy to keep one shred of dignity? For God's sakes! I can't stand to see him in all this pain! You vicious bastards! Let him move in with you! Is it so bad to see somebody happy? So just let him move in! For the love of God, let the boy move in with you! Good Lord!
And I will not let you down.
We do a little trolling. It's called We Do a Little Trolling.
What? In my mind, that's the end game.
If you're listening for free and would like to support the show, the best way to do that is by signing up for a paid subscription at imyourmoderator.substack.com. You can find the info stream over on Telegram at t.me/veryreasonable. The merch site is cancelcouture.com, and for all my other links, you can visit linktree.com/imyourmoderator. And I'll see you soon. down on the range.